The telegram trembled in Abigail Warren's gloved hands as passengers rushed past her on the platform. "Cannot marry you. Found another. Do not come." The words blurred through her tears. Her ivory wedding dress, carefully packed for 3 weeks of travel, now felt like a shroud. She was stranded, 1,500 miles from Boston, with $17 to her name and nowhere to go. Then she heard it, a child's scream, and running footsteps headed straight for the tracks. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my tale has traveled. The Wyoming wind cut through Abigail's traveling cloak like a knife through butter, carrying with it the scent of coal smoke and sagebrush. She stood frozen on the wooden platform of Cheyenne Station, her fingers clutching the cruel telegram that had shattered her carefully constructed future. Around her, the chaos of the frontier town swirled, cowboys shouting, horses neighing, the clatter of wagon wheels on hard-packed earth, but she heard none of it. The world had narrowed to those few typewritten words that had arrived just as her train pulled into the station. "Cannot marry you. Found another. Do not come. J. Whitmore." 3 weeks ago, she had left Boston in a traveling suit of deep blue wool, her trunk packed with a wedding dress of ivory silk and Brussels lace, her mother's pearl combs, and 6 carefully embroidered handkerchiefs. She had been traveling to marry James Whitmore, a banker's son she had met only twice before, in arrangements made by their families. It was a practical match. James needed a wife of good breeding, and Abigail's family needed the financial security his family could provide after her father's investments had failed. She had told herself it would be enough, that affection might grow where necessity planted it, that she could build a life on steady ground rather than romantic fancy. How foolish she had been. Miss, are you quite all right?" Abigail blinked and found herself looking into the concerned face of an elderly porter, his weathered skin creased with worry. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, thank you. I'm quite well." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but what else could she say? That she was utterly ruined? That she had no home to return to, no prospects, no future? That her mother had used the last of her inheritance to pay for this journey, telling all their neighbors and remaining friends that Abigail was going west to marry well? "You look a mite pale, if you don't mind my saying." The porter shifted his weight, glancing around the platform. "You got someone meeting you?" "Yes," Abigail lied again, smooth as silk now. "Any moment now." The porter nodded, tipped his cap, and moved on to help a family struggling with an enormous trunk. Abigail forced herself to breathe, to think. She had $17 in her reticule. The return ticket to Boston would cost nearly twice that, and even if she could afford it, what would she return to? The rented rooms her mother had already given up? The pitying stares of their social circle? The whispers that Abigail Warren couldn't even secure a marriage of convenience? No, she couldn't go back. But she couldn't stay here either, stranded on this platform in a town she didn't know, in a territory that still felt more wild than civilized. She needed to move, to do something, anything to escape the paralysis of shock. Abigail bent to pick up her traveling bag. Her trunk was still somewhere in the baggage car, along with that cursed wedding dress, when she heard it. A high-pitched shriek, pure terror in its tone, followed by the sound of small feet running. Abigail's head snapped up just in time to see a flash of red hair and a blue dress hurtling across the platform. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, was racing toward the edge where the platform dropped off to the tracks. Behind her, perhaps 20 feet back, a little boy with the same copper-bright hair was chasing her, laughing. Lily, stop!" A man's voice, deep and urgent, cut through the platform noise. But the little girl didn't stop. She was crying now. The laughter of the game turned to fear, her small legs pumping as she ran straight for the platform's edge. Beyond it, Abigail could see the gleam of steel tracks, and in the distance heard the warning whistle of an approaching train. No one else seemed to notice. A group of businessmen were absorbed in their conversation. A mother was scolding her son about his muddy boots. The porter had his back turned. Abigail didn't think. She dropped her bag and ran. Her skirts tangled around her ankles, and she hitched them up with one hand, propriety be damned, her boots pounding against the wooden planks. The little girl was so close to the edge now. Just 2 steps, 1 step. Abigail lunged forward and caught the child around the waist. her momentum carrying them both sideways and down. They hit the platform hard, Abigail twisting at the last second to take the brunt of the impact on her shoulder. Pain shot through her arm, but she held on tight as the little girl sobbed against her chest. "Lily!" Heavy footsteps thundered toward them, and then a man was dropping to his knees beside them, his hands reaching for the child. He was tall, Abigail could tell even with him kneeling, with shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun. His face was all sharp angles and shadowed stubble, and his eyes were the clearest, most piercing blue she had ever seen. Those eyes were fixed on the little girl with such naked fear that Abigail felt it in her own chest. "Lily, sweetheart, are you hurt?" His voice was rough, Western in its cadence, and shaking slightly. His hands moved over the child with swift efficiency, checking for injuries. "Papa!" The little girl launched herself from Abigail's arms into his, wrapping small arms around his neck. "Mama! I want Mama!" The man's face went white, then red, emotions flashing across it too quickly to name. He held his daughter close, one large hand cradling the back of her red-gold head, and closed his eyes briefly. "I know, baby girl, I know." "I'm sorry, Papa." This from the little boy who had been chasing his sister. He stood a few feet away, his identical blue eyes swimming with tears, his hands twisted in his shirt. "I was just playing. I didn't mean to scare her. I didn't mean—" "Come here, James." The man held out one arm, and the boy rushed into it, burrowing against his father's side. The man held both children for a moment, his eyes still closed, and Abigail saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. Then those blue eyes opened and fixed on her. "Ma'am." His voice was steadier now, but still rough around the edges. "I don't have words to thank you properly. If you hadn't—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "If you hadn't been there—" Abigail sat up slowly, wincing as her bruised shoulder protested. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in dark waves around her face. She could feel the beginnings of what would surely be a spectacular bruise blooming along her side. "She's safe," Abigail said softly. "That's all that matters." The man stared at her for a long moment, and Abigail felt oddly exposed under that piercing gaze, as if he could see past her composed exterior to the desperate, frightened woman beneath. Then he seemed to collect himself. He shifted both children to one side and stood, offering Abigail his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong as he pulled her to her feet with an ease that spoke of hard physical labor. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and his clothes marked him as a rancher. Worn denim trousers, a faded cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, scuffed leather boots. A Stetson hung down his back by a cord around his neck. "Quinn Mackenzie," he said, still holding her hand. "And these two hooligans are Lily and James, my twins." Abigail Warren. She gently extracted her hand from his, suddenly aware of how improper this all was, standing on a public platform with a strange man while looking thoroughly disheveled. "I'm pleased they're unharmed." "Miss Warren." Quinn Mackenzie's eyes swept over her face, taking in details she wished he wouldn't see. The redness of her eyes from crying, the pallor of her cheeks, the way her hands trembled slightly as she tried to smooth her hair. "Forgive me for saying so, but you look like you've had about as rough a day as I have." It was the kindness in his voice that nearly undid her. Abigail felt her throat tighten and blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of this stranger and his children. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she managed. "Papa, the lady saved me." Lily had stopped crying and was peeking at Abigail from the safety of her father's arms. "She caught me before I falled." "Fell," Abigail corrected automatically, then colored. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize." Quinn's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Lord knows these two need all the grammar lessons they can get. Mrs. Hodgson does her best, but—" He trailed off, his expression growing distant for a moment. "Who's Mrs. Hodgson?" James asked, tugging on his father's shirt. "Is she the new teacher? Are we getting a teacher?" "No, son. Mrs. Hodgson is—" Quinn stopped, his eyes returning to Abigail's face. She watched as something shifted in his expression, an idea forming that she could see taking shape in those remarkable eyes. "Miss Warren, forgive my forwardness, but are you waiting for someone?" Only, I noticed you've been standing on this platform for near about 20 minutes now, and heat flooded Abigail's face. Had he been watching her? Had he seen her reading that terrible telegram? Seen her standing alone and lost? She searched for a lie, for any plausible explanation, but she was so tired of lying. No, I'm not waiting for anyone. But you're traveling alone? His tone was careful, non-judgmental. If you don't mind me asking, where are you headed? I don't know. The words escaped before she could stop them, raw and honest and utterly humiliating. Abigail pressed her lips together, wishing she could take them back, but Quinn Mackenzie just nodded slowly, as if her answer made perfect sense. The twins and I, we're headed back to our ranch, he said. It's about an hour's drive from here. Mrs. Hodgson, she's our housekeeper. She was supposed to meet us here with the wagon, but... He glanced around the platform. She's nowhere in sight. I imagine something came up at the ranch. Abigail didn't understand why he was telling her this. She waited, her heart beginning to beat faster. Miss Warren. Quinn shifted Lily to his other hip, his expression growing serious. I'm about to say something that's going to sound completely improper, possibly insane, and I need you to hear me out before you run off thinking I'm some kind of lunatic. Despite everything, Abigail felt the corners of her mouth twitch. All right. These children need a mother. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Their mama died 8 months ago. Fever took her in 3 days. Since then, I've been trying to manage the ranch and care for them, and I'm failing at both. Mrs. Hodgson helps where she can, but she's got her own family to tend. I've written to every teaching agency between here and Denver trying to hire a governess, but no one wants to come this far out. The ranch is isolated, the pay isn't much, and most women hear widower with 2 children and assume the worst. He paused, his jaw working, and Abigail could see the words cost him something to say. I can see you're in some kind of trouble, he continued quietly. I don't know what, and I'm not asking you to tell me. But I'm a good judge of character, had to be, running a ranch. And I can see you're educated, well-bred, and kind. You saved my daughter's life without a second thought. So I'm asking you, right here on this platform, to consider coming to work for me, as a governess for the twins, teaching them their letters, their numbers, their manners, helping them grieve their mother properly. Abigail stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. This man, this complete stranger, was offering her employment? Just like that? Mr. Mackenzie, I know how it sounds, he interrupted, but I'm desperate, Miss Warren, truly desperate. And unless I'm very much mistaken, so are you. His eyes held hers, direct and unflinching. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. Room and board plus $30 a month. The ranch house is big enough that you'd have your own quarters, completely separate from the family rooms. Mrs. Hodgson would be there as chaperone. Everything proper and above board. $30 a month. Room and board. Somewhere to go, something to do. A purpose. When her entire future had just collapsed around her ears. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. I don't even know you, Abigail whispered. No, Quinn agreed, but you know my children now, a little. And I suspect you're a better judge of character than you think. He glanced down at the twins who were watching this exchange with wide, curious eyes. What do you say we make it a trial? 2 weeks. Give it 2 weeks, and if at the end of that time you want to leave, I'll pay you the full month's wages and personally drive you back to this station. You can go wherever you want, back east, up to Montana, down to Texas, anywhere, but at least you'll have 2 weeks to figure out what that wherever might be. Abigail's mind raced. It was insane, completely insane. She didn't know this man from Adam. He could be anyone, a criminal, a drunk, a violent man who showed one face in public and another behind closed doors. Going off alone with him to an isolated ranch was the height of foolishness. But what choice did she have? Stay here in Cheyenne with no money, no prospects, no connections? Try to find work in a frontier town where respectable employment for women was scarce? Attempt to make her way to Denver or Santa Fe with nothing but $17 and increasingly desperate hopes? Or take this chance? This impossible, insane, potentially disastrous chance. Miss Warren? A small voice piped up. Lily was looking at her with eyes that were the exact same shade of blue as her father's, but rounder, softer, rimmed with red from crying. Will you come with us? Papa tells good stories, and Mrs. Hodgson makes biscuits every morning, and there's a creek with frogs in it. The frogs are very important, James added solemnly. There's 12 of them, we counted. Despite herself, despite the fear and uncertainty churning in her stomach, Abigail felt something warm unfurl in her chest. These children had just lost their mother. They were afraid and grieving and trying so hard to be brave. She knew what that felt like, had felt it herself when her father died 5 years ago, leaving her mother and herself to navigate a suddenly uncertain world. She looked up at Quinn Mackenzie. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched. He was braced for rejection, for disappointment, a man at the end of his rope making one last desperate attempt to find help for his children. 2 weeks, Abigail heard herself say. I'll try it for 2 weeks. The relief that washed over Quinn's face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked like he might say something, but instead he just nodded. 2 weeks, he agreed. Thank you, Miss Warren. Truly. You should know, Abigail said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. I have no experience as a governess. I was educated at a women's academy in Boston, but I've never taught before. Can you read? Of course. Write? Do sums? Yes. Know which fork to use at dinner and how to address a letter properly. Despite everything, Abigail felt a smile tug at her lips. Yes. Then you know more than most folks out here, and far more than these two currently do. Quinn shifted both children, settling them more comfortably against his hips. Come on, let's get your bags and see about finding Mrs. Hodgson, or at least figuring out where she's got to. We can rent a wagon if needed. Abigail retrieved her traveling bag from where she'd dropped it. Quinn led the way through the crowded platform toward the baggage car, the twins chattering now, their earlier fear forgotten with the resilience of children. Abigail followed, her mind still reeling. What had she just agreed to? What was she doing? But as they walked through the throng of people, miners and merchants, cowboys and settlers, all the varied humanity that made up this frontier town, Abigail realized something. For the first time since she'd read James Whitmore's telegram, she didn't feel completely hopeless. She felt terrified, yes, uncertain, absolutely, but also, somewhere deep in her chest, she felt the faintest flicker of possibility. At the baggage car, Quinn handed both children to Abigail with a quick, hold on to them tight, before he swung up into the car to help the attendant locate her trunk. Lily immediately grabbed one of Abigail's hands, and James took the other, both of them gazing up at her with identical expressions of curious interest. Are you sad? Lily asked with the blunt directness of childhood. Abigail blinked, startled. What makes you say that? Your eyes are red, like when I cry. There was no judgment in the little girl's voice, just simple observation and perhaps a touch of sympathy. Abigail found herself kneeling down so she was at eye level with both children, still holding their hands. I was sad, she admitted, earlier, but I think perhaps I'm feeling a little better now. Good, James said firmly. Papa says it's okay to be sad sometimes, but it's better to be happy. Being sad makes your tummy hurt. Your father is a wise man. He's the best papa in the whole world, Lily declared with absolute certainty, even though he can't make biscuits as good as Mrs. Hodgson. That's true, James agreed. Papa's biscuits are terrible. They're hard like rocks. I heard that. Quinn's voice came from above them, warm with amusement. He was leaning over the edge of the baggage car, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The first real smile Abigail had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger, more approachable. For that young man, you can help me carry this trunk. I'm only 5, James protested, but he was grinning. Big enough to help, then. Quinn dropped down from the car with an easy grace, landing lightly despite his size. Behind him, the baggage attendant lowered Abigail's trunk to the platform with a grunt. It was the large one, the one she had packed so carefully back in Boston with all her hopes for her new life. The life that would never happen now. Quinn must have seen something in her face because his expression grew gentle. We'll get it loaded up, don't you worry. But when he reached for the trunk, Abigail stopped him with a hand on his arm. Through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath, warm from the sun. She pulled her hand back quickly. "Mr. Mackenzie, I should tell you, there's a wedding dress in there." He paused, his hand on the trunk's handle, and looked at her. Understanding dawned in those blue eyes. "The someone who wasn't waiting for you at the station," he said quietly. "Yes. I'm sorry." The simple words, spoken with genuine sympathy, nearly broke through Abigail's carefully maintained composure. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Well then," Quinn said after a moment, "maybe after 2 weeks at the ranch, you'll want to burn that dress, or maybe you'll want to pack it up and take it with you when you leave. Either way, we'll make sure it's safe until you decide." It was such a practical, non-judgmental response that Abigail felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. He wasn't going to pry, wasn't going to demand explanations or make assumptions. He was simply going to let her be. "Thank you," she said softly. Quinn nodded and lifted the trunk as if it weighed nothing, balancing it on one shoulder. "Now, let's see about that wagon. If Mrs. Hodgson isn't here, we'll need to rent one from the livery." They made their way through the station and out onto the main street of Cheyenne. After the crowds of the platform, the street felt almost overwhelming in its noise and chaos. Wagons rolled past, their wheels throwing up clouds of dust. Horses stamped and nickered at hitching posts. Music spilled from a saloon somewhere, competing with the sound of hammers from a construction site down the block. Abigail had thought Boston was loud, but this was different. This was raw and unpolished, a town still finding its shape, still deciding what it would become. There was an energy to it that was simultaneously exciting and frightening. "Stay close," Quinn said, shifting the trunk to his other shoulder and placing his free hand on James's head. "Lily, hold on to Miss Warren's skirt." Lily obeyed immediately, her small fingers gripping the fabric of Abigail's traveling dress. Together, they navigated the crowded street toward a large building with Morrison's livery painted across the front. Inside, the smell of hay and horses was strong, but not unpleasant. A man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard looked up from where he was examining a horse's hoof. "Quinn Mackenzie, didn't expect to see you in town today." "Wasn't planning on it, Henry, but here I am." Quinn set down Abigail's trunk with a thud. "I need to rent a wagon. Mine seems to have wandered off somewhere, Mrs. Hodgson and all." Henry straightened, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "Sarah Hodgson? I saw her about 2 hours back heading west in your wagon fast as those old mules would go. Looked worried about something." Quinn's face tightened. "Damn, something at the ranch then." "Most like," Henry agreed. Then his eyes found Abigail, and curiosity lit his weathered features. "And who might this be?" "Miss Abigail Warren," Quinn said before Abigail could introduce herself. "She's agreed to come work as governess for the twins." "Has she now?" Henry's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Well, I'll be. You've been looking for someone for months. I'm aware." Quinn's tone suggested he'd prefer not to discuss it further. "About that wagon?" Right. Henry turned and called toward the back of the stable. "Billy, hitch up the buckboard for Mr. Mackenzie." While they waited, Henry kept casting curious glances at Abigail, clearly bursting with questions he was too polite to ask. Abigail stood very still, acutely aware of how she must look, travel-worn and disheveled, standing in a livery stable with a strange man and his children. This was so far beyond the bounds of propriety that it was almost laughable. What would her mother say if she could see her now? But then Lily tugged on her skirt and asked, "Miss Warren, do you know any stories about frogs?" And Abigail found herself smiling despite her anxiety. "I know one about a frog who wanted to be a prince," she said. "Tell us!" James bounced excitedly. "Tell us now." "On the ride home," Quinn interjected. "We've got an hour ahead of us, plenty of time for stories." A young man, presumably Billy, led out a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. Quinn loaded Abigail's trunk into the back with practiced efficiency, then turned to help her up onto the bench seat. His hand spanned her waist as he lifted her up as easily as he had his children, and Abigail felt her breath catch at the casual display of strength. "Thank you," she managed. He swung up beside her after settling both twins in the back with strict instructions to sit still and hold on. The bench was narrow, and Abigail was intensely aware of the warmth of his body next to hers, the brush of his shoulder against hers as he gathered the reins. "Ready?" he asked. No, Abigail thought. She wasn't ready for any of this, not for the strange turn her life had taken, not for this wild frontier town, not for the uncertain future ahead. "Yes," she said. Quinn clicked his tongue and the horses started forward, pulling them out of the livery yard and onto the street. They turned west, leaving the buildings of Cheyenne behind, heading toward the open prairie that stretched endlessly ahead. As the town fell away and the landscape opened up around them, vast and empty and beautiful in its stark way, Abigail felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there, and uncertainty, and the raw ache of James Whitmore's rejection. But threading through it all was something else. Hope. "Tell us the story," Lily called from the back. "Tell us about the frog prince." Abigail turned on the bench so she could see both children and began to speak. Behind her, Quinn Mackenzie drove the wagon west toward home, listening to her voice rise and fall with the cadence of the story. And ahead of them, beneath the endless Wyoming sky, a new chapter waited to begin. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically as they rolled westward, leaving behind the last scattered buildings of Cheyenne. Abigail finished her story about the frog prince, and both twins had fallen silent, lulled by the steady motion and the warmth of the afternoon sun. She turned back around on the bench, adjusting her skirts, and found Quinn watching her with an unreadable expression. "You're good with them," he said quietly, his eyes returning to the road ahead. "They're easy to be good with," Abigail replied. "They're lovely children. They weren't always this calm." Quinn's jaw tightened slightly. First few months after Martha died, they hardly slept. Lily would wake up screaming every night, and James... He stopped, shook his head. James stopped talking for near about 6 weeks, just went completely silent. Doctor said it was the shock of it. Abigail's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry. Mrs. Hodgson helped where she could, but she's got 5 children of her own and a husband who works the railroad. She'd come by during the day, make meals, clean a bit, but nights were..." He paused, and Abigail saw his knuckles whiten on the reins. Nights were rough. They rode in silence for a moment, the prairie stretching out around them in every direction. The land here was nothing like Boston. There were no trees to speak of, just endless grassland rolling toward distant mountains that looked purple in the afternoon light. The sky seemed impossibly vast, bigger than any sky Abigail had ever seen, and the wind carried scents she didn't recognize, sage and dust and something wild. "What about you?" Quinn asked, his voice careful. "You said you were educated at an academy?" "Miss Porter's School for Young Ladies," Abigail confirmed. "In Boston, literature, history, French, music, deportment." She heard the slight bitterness creep into her voice and tried to smooth it away. All the accomplishments necessary for a young woman of good family. But not what you wanted. The question surprised her. Most men wouldn't have thought to ask. "I wanted to study medicine," she admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. "My father's brother was a physician, and I used to help him sometimes when I was younger, but that's not..." She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "That's not a suitable ambition for a woman." "Says who?" Abigail turned to look at him, but Quinn's eyes were still on the road, his expression neutral. "Says everyone? Says society. Says the medical schools that won't admit women. There's a woman doctor down in Colorado Territory," Quinn said. "Read about her in the newspaper last year. Opened her own practice, serves minors and their families. Seemed to be doing just fine. One woman out of thousands. Has to start somewhere." He glanced at her then, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "Out here, Miss Warren, folks care less about what's suitable and more about what's useful. A woman who can set a broken bone or deliver a baby is worth her weight in gold, no matter what some fancy school back east thinks about it." Abigail didn't know what to say to that. She turned her attention back to the landscape, watching the grass ripple in the wind like waves on an ocean. In the back of the wagon, she could hear Lily's soft breathing. The little girl had fallen asleep. "Can I ask you something?" Quinn's voice was quiet enough not to wake his daughter. "I suppose." "The man who sent that telegram. Did you love him?" Abigail stiffened. That's a rather personal question, Mr. Mackenzie. Yes, it is. You don't have to answer. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I'm asking because if you did love him, if your heart's broken over this, then maybe coming to the ranch isn't the best idea. Heartbreak and isolation don't mix well. I learned that the hard way. Abigail considered lying. It would be easier, more comfortable. But something about this man, about his directness, his clear expectation of honesty, made her want to tell the truth. No, she said finally. I didn't love him. I barely knew him. It was an arranged match made by our families. I was prepared to do my duty and hope that affection might grow over time. She twisted her hands in her lap. What hurts isn't the loss of him. It's the humiliation, the fact that even a marriage of convenience wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. That's not on you. Quinn's voice was firm. Man who'd break an engagement by telegram isn't worth your time or your tears. That's on his character, not yours. You don't know that. You don't know me. I know you threw yourself in front of a moving child without a second thought. I know you're sitting here next to a strange man heading to an isolated ranch because you're brave enough to take a chance when your world fell apart. I know you told my children a story that made them smile when they haven't smiled much in 8 months. He paused. That tells me plenty about your character, Miss Warren. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks, and not from the sun. She wasn't used to such direct praise, such unvarnished honesty. In Boston, compliments came wrapped in layers of social nicety, saying everything and nothing at the same time. You're very kind, she managed. Not kind, honest. There's a difference. Quinn shifted the reins to one hand and gestured ahead with the other. See those mountains? That's the Laramie Range. Ranch sits in the foothills, about 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. It's not fancy, and it's not easy living. Winters are hard. Summers are hot. Spring brings mud that'll swallow a wagon wheel, and fall brings wind that'll knock you flat. The work is constant, and the isolation is real. You're not exactly selling me on this position. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Just want you to know what you're getting into. I won't lie to you or sugarcoat things, Miss Warren. I need help too badly to risk you leaving after a week because reality didn't match expectations. I appreciate your honesty. That said, Quinn continued, there's beauty here too. Sunrises that'll take your breath away. Stars so thick you could reach up and touch them. Wildflowers in spring that carpet the whole prairie. And a kind of peace once you get used to the quiet. Martha loved it. Said she could finally hear herself think out here. The way he said his wife's name, gentle, reverent, aching, made Abigail's throat tighten. How long were you married? 7 years. Met her in Denver when I was buying cattle. She was working in her father's general store. His voice went soft with memory. Prettiest thing I'd ever seen, with red hair like fire and a laugh that could light up a room. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her to dinner, and another 6 to convince her to marry a rancher and move to the middle of nowhere. She must have loved you very much. I hope so. I loved her enough for both of us. He was quiet for a moment. Still do, if I'm honest. Don't reckon that ever stops. Abigail thought about James Whitmore and tried to imagine grieving him the way Quinn clearly grieved his Martha. She couldn't. What did that say about her? That she was cold? Unfeeling? Or simply that she'd never known the kind of love Quinn was describing? The children have her hair, she said softly. Everything else is mine, though. The stubbornness, the temper, the way they can't sit still for more than 5 minutes. He glanced back at the sleeping twins. Martha used to say they got the best of both of us. I sure hope she was right. James stirred in the back of the wagon, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Papa, how much longer? Another half hour or so, son. See that creek up ahead? We follow that most of the way home. Abigail could indeed see a line of green in the distance, marking where water flowed. As they drew closer, she could make out cottonwood trees growing along the banks, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. It was the first real vegetation she'd seen since leaving Cheyenne, and something in her chest loosened at the sight. Can we stop? James asked. I'm thirsty. Quinn checked the sun's position, then nodded. Quick stop. We need to get home before dark. He guided the wagon down to the creek's edge and set the brake. James scrambled out immediately, running toward the water with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old who'd been sitting still too long. Lily woke with a start, looking confused for a moment before she spotted the creek and followed her brother with equal enthusiasm. "Stay where I can see you," Quinn called after them, "and don't get your clothes wet." He climbed down from the wagon and turned to help Abigail, his hands once again spanning her waist. This time she was more prepared for the contact, but it still sent an odd flutter through her stomach. His hands lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before he released her. "Thank you," she said, stepping back quickly. "Creek's clean if you want a drink. We've got a canteen somewhere in the back, but the twins probably drank it all." Abigail followed him toward the water, grateful to stretch her legs. The creek was perhaps 15 feet wide, running clear over smooth stones. She could see why the children were fascinated. There were indeed frogs sitting on the rocks, their throats pulsing and minnows darting through the shallows. She knelt by the edge, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cold and sweet, nothing like the tepid, metallic-tasting water from the station. When she looked up, she found Quinn watching her with that same unreadable expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just thinking how strange fate is." He knelt beside her, drinking his fill. "This morning I woke up dreading another failed trip to town, another rejection letter from a teaching agency. And now here you are." "Here I am," Abigail echoed. "Though I'm still not entirely sure this is real. This morning I was—" She stopped, the memory of reading that telegram still raw. "You were supposed to be getting married." "Yes." "What was he like? This man you were going to marry?" Abigail thought about James Whitmore, trying to conjure his face clearly. It was already fading, she realized. Polite? Reserved. He had good prospects and came from an excellent family. Our mothers thought we'd suit. "But you didn't?" "I don't know. We never had the chance to find out." She picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed, turning it over in her fingers. "He kissed me once, after our second meeting. It was—" She paused, searching for the word. "Perfunctory. Like sealing a business arrangement. That's no way to kiss a woman you're planning to marry." The certainty in Quinn's voice made her look up. His blue eyes were intense, focused entirely on her, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with something Abigail couldn't name. How should a man kiss a woman he plans to marry? The question escaped before she could stop it, bold and improper. Quinn held her gaze for a long moment. Like she's precious. Like she's a gift he can't quite believe he's been given. Like he wants to memorize the taste of her because one kiss will never be enough. Abigail's breath caught. The stone slipped from her fingers and splashed into the water. "Papa! Miss Warren! Come see!" Lily's excited voice shattered the moment. "James found a turtle!" Quinn stood abruptly, offering Abigail his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and they walked together toward where the twins were crouched by a fallen log. Sure enough, there was a small turtle basking in a patch of sunlight, its ancient eyes blinking slowly at its audience. "Can we keep him?" James asked immediately. "No," Quinn said firmly. "Wild things belong in the wild, son. We've talked about this." "But he could live in the barn. He'd be miserable in the barn. He wants to stay here by his creek, with his family." "He has a family?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "Sure he does. Probably got a wife turtle and baby turtles waiting for him somewhere." James considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, he can stay. But can we visit him sometimes?" "Anytime we pass this way," Quinn promised. He ruffled his son's hair. "Now, say goodbye to Mr. Turtle. We need to get moving." The children chorused their farewells to the turtle, who seemed unimpressed by the attention. Quinn herded them back toward the wagon, lifting each one into the back with easy strength. Then he turned to Abigail. "Ready for the final stretch?" "As ready as I'll ever be." He smiled, another real smile that transformed his face, and helped her back onto the bench. As they pulled away from the creek, Abigail looked back once at the cottonwood trees and the clear water sparkling in the sunlight. She had the oddest feeling that she'd remember this moment, this place, for the rest of her life, though she couldn't have said why. The landscape began to change as they traveled. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, and scattered pines appeared among the grassland. The mountains were closer now, close enough that Abigail could make out individual peaks and the dark patches of forest on their slopes. The air smelled different too, crisper, tinged with pine and earth. "Almost home," Quinn said, and she heard the satisfaction in his voice. They crested a hill, and suddenly Abigail could see the ranch spread out below them. It was bigger than she'd expected. A main house of rough-hewn logs with a covered porch, several outbuildings including a large barn, corrals holding horses and cattle, and beyond it all, vast stretches of fenced pasture. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, and she could see a woman's figure moving on the porch. "That'll be Mrs. Hodgson," Quinn said. "Looks like she made it back all right." As they descended the hill, the woman on the porch shaded her eyes, watching their approach. She was short and stout, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple calico covered by a worn apron. When they drew close enough, Abigail could see the worry etched into her weathered face. "Mr. Quinn?" she called out before the wagon had even fully stopped. "Thank the Lord you're back. We've had a time of it today, we have." Quinn set the brake and jumped down. "What happened, Sarah?" "One of the mares got tangled in fence wire out in the south pasture. Gashed her leg, something terrible. I had to fetch Tom from the railroad to help me get her free and into the barn. That's why I couldn't meet you at the station. There wasn't time." She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing hard. "The mare's in bad shape, Mr. Quinn. Tom did what he could, but she needs a real veterinarian." "Damn." Quinn ran a hand through his hair, his expression tight. "Which mare?" "The gray, your Martha's favorite." Something flickered across Quinn's face, pain, quickly suppressed. "I'll see to her. Tom still here?" "No, he had to get back to work, but he said to send word if you need him." Mrs. Hodgson's eyes found Abigail then, taking in her presence with obvious surprise. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Hodgson, this is Miss Abigail Warren. She's agreed to come work as governess for the twins." Quinn moved to help Abigail down, his hands steady despite the tension she could feel in him. "Miss Warren, this is Mrs. Sarah Hodgson, who keeps this household running and these children fed." "Ma'am." Abigail nodded politely, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after the journey. Mrs. Hodgson's eyebrows had risen nearly to her hairline. "A governess? Just like that? Mr. Quinn, you can't just bring home a stranger." "We'll discuss it later, Sarah. Right now I need to see to that mare." He turned to the twins who had climbed out of the wagon and were standing uncertainly nearby. "James, Lily, you go with Mrs. Hodgson. Get washed up for supper." "But Papa," James started. "Now, son, this isn't a time for arguing." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed, taking Lily's hand and following Mrs. Hodgson toward the house. The housekeeper cast one more suspicious glance at Abigail before ushering the children inside. Quinn started for the barn, then paused and looked back at Abigail. "I'm sorry. This isn't the welcome I'd planned. Make yourself comfortable in the house. Sarah will show you around. I'll be in as soon as I can." "Mr. Mackenzie," Abigail called after him. He turned back. "Can I help?" "Help?" "With the mare. I told you my uncle was a physician. He taught me some basics, how to clean wounds, apply bandages. I've helped with injured animals before." Quinn studied her for a long moment. "You just got here. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm offering." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or a kind of cautious hope. "All right then. Come on." The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and horses. Quinn led her to a large stall at the end where a beautiful gray mare stood with one leg wrapped in blood-soaked rags. She was trembling, her eyes rolling white with pain and fear. "Easy, girl, easy, Moonlight." Quinn's voice dropped to a soothing murmur as he approached the horse. "That's my girl. We're going to help you." The mare whickered softly, pressing her nose against Quinn's chest. He stroked her neck with one hand while examining the makeshift bandage with the other. "It's bad," he said quietly. "Wire cut deep. If infection sets in—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Let me see." Abigail moved closer, keeping her movements slow and calm. She'd learned from her uncle that injured animals could sense fear and nervousness. Do you have clean cloth? Water. Whiskey or any kind of spirits? There's a medical kit in the tack room. Whiskey in the house. Get them both. And more light. I need to see what I'm doing. Quinn nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with a lantern, a battered wooden box, and a bottle of whiskey. Abigail rolled up her sleeves, removed her gloves, and began carefully unwrapping the bloody rags from the mare's leg. The wound was indeed bad, 3 deep gashes where the wire had caught and torn the flesh. But Abigail had seen worse. Her uncle had sometimes been called to treat farm animals when the owners couldn't afford a veterinarian, and she'd assisted him more than once. Talk to her, Abigail said, gently probing the edges of the wound. The mare flinched, but didn't pull away. Keep her calm. Quinn positioned himself at the mare's head, his hands steady on her halter, his voice a low, continuous stream of soothing words. Abigail poured whiskey over the wound, cleaning away dirt and debris while the mare stamped and snorted. Then she took clean cloth from the medical kit and began carefully bandaging the leg, wrapping it snugly but not so tight as to cut off circulation. This needs to be changed twice a day, she said, tying off the bandage. And watch carefully for signs of infection, heat, swelling, discharge. If you have any salve or ointment, that should be applied each time you change the dressing. I've got some salve the vet left last time. Quinn's eyes were fixed on the neat bandage, his expression one of amazed relief. You really do know what you're doing. Basic field medicine. My uncle believed everyone should know how to treat common injuries. Abigail straightened, wiping her hands on a clean corner of cloth. Her traveling dress was now stained with blood and dirt, ruined beyond any hope of recovery. She found she didn't care. She should heal, Mr. Mackenzie, assuming infection doesn't set in. Keep her still, keep the wound clean, and give her time. Time and care. Quinn's voice was thick with emotion. This horse, Martha loved her. Rode her every day. After Martha died, I couldn't bring myself to... He stopped, clearing his throat. Thank you, Miss Warren. Truly. Abigail nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day crash over her like a wave. Her shoulder ached where she'd hit the platform. Her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline of tending the wound, and she was acutely aware that she'd just done something highly improper, working alone in a barn with a man she barely knew, handling a medical situation without supervision or propriety. But the mare was standing more comfortably now, her eyes calm, and Quinn was looking at Abigail like she'd performed a miracle. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you inside. You've had enough for one day. They walked together toward the house through the gathering dusk. The sky had turned deep blue, and the first stars were beginning to appear. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the mountains, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Mrs. Hodgson met them at the door, her expression torn between disapproval and grudging respect when she saw the state of Abigail's dress and hands. "The mare?" she asked Quinn. "Gonna be all right, thanks to Miss Warren." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose again, and she studied Abigail with new interest. "Is that so? Well then, Miss Warren, you'll be wanting to wash up. I've put you in the room at the end of the hall, upstairs. It was going to be the nursery, but we never—" She stopped, glancing at Quinn. "That'll be fine, Sarah, thank you. Your trunk is already up there. Supper in 30 minutes. Nothing fancy, just stew and biscuits." She turned to Abigail. "Come on then. I'll show you your room." Abigail followed Mrs. Hodgson up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The house was simply furnished but clean, with wide plank floors and whitewashed walls. Mrs. Hodgson opened a door at the end of a short hallway, revealing a small room with a single bed, a washstand, a dresser, and a window overlooking the front yard. "It's not much," Mrs. Hodgson said, her tone slightly defensive. "But it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. Pitcher's full of fresh water and there's soap in the dish. Privy's out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed." "It's lovely," Abigail said honestly. After the uncertainty of the day, the fear and confusion, this simple room felt like a sanctuary. "Thank you, Mrs. Hodgson." The housekeeper hesitated in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something. Finally, she blurted out, "What are you running from?" "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. A lady like you, educated and refined, doesn't just appear in Wyoming and agree to work as a governess on an isolated ranch unless she's running from something. Mrs. Hodgson's eyes were sharp but not unkind. I need to know if you're going to bring trouble to this house. These children have been through enough. Abigail met the older woman's gaze steadily. I'm not running from anything illegal or dangerous. I was supposed to be married today, but the groom changed his mind. I had nowhere to go and no way to get home. Mr. Mackenzie offered me honest work, and I accepted. That's all. Mrs. Hodgson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. That's honest enough, I suppose. And Mr. Quinn's a good judge of character, better than most give him credit for. She turned to leave, then paused. The children need someone kind, someone patient. They're good children, but they're hurt and confused and missing their mama something fierce. Can you be that for them? I can try, Abigail said softly. Then I suppose we'll see how it goes. Supper in 30 minutes. Don't be late. After Mrs. Hodgson left, Abigail sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a novel rather than her actual life. This morning she'd been on a train, reading a telegram that destroyed her future. Tonight she was in Wyoming, in a rancher's house, preparing to become a governess to 2 motherless children. How had this happened? She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the darkening landscape. She could see the barn where moonlight was resting, the corrals with their horses and cattle, the vast sweep of prairie beyond. It was so different from Boston, from everything she'd known. And yet standing here, looking out at this wild, beautiful place, she didn't feel as lost as she had on that train platform. She felt, impossibly, like she might have found something. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Warren? Lily's small voice called. Mrs. Hodgson says it's time for supper. Abigail quickly washed her face and hands, changed into a clean dress from her trunk, and followed Lily downstairs. The dining room was small and cozy, lit by lanterns that cast warm pools of light. Quinn sat at the head of a rough wooden table, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. The twins were on one side, and Mrs. Hodgson was ladling stew from a large pot at the other end. Sit here, Miss Warren. James patted the chair beside him enthusiastically. Abigail took the offered seat, and Mrs. Hodgson placed a bowl of steaming stew in front of her. It smelled wonderful, rich and savory, with chunks of beef and vegetables. Let's say grace, Quinn said, and everyone bowed their heads. Lord, we thank you for this food, for the hands that prepared it, and for bringing Miss Warren safely to us today. Amen. Amen, everyone echoed. For a few minutes there was only the sound of spoons against bowls and Mrs. Hodgson's biscuits being passed around. Then Lily looked up at Abigail with her big blue eyes. Miss Warren, are you going to stay with us forever? The question hung in the air. Abigail felt everyone's eyes turn toward her. Mrs. Hodgson suspicious, James hopeful, Quinn carefully neutral. I'm going to stay for 2 weeks, Abigail said gently, and then we'll see. But what if we want you to stay longer? Lily's lip trembled slightly. Then we'll talk about it when the 2 weeks are over. How does that sound? The little girl considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but I hope you stay forever. Lily, Quinn said gently, don't pressure Miss Warren. I'm not. I'm just hoping. Despite the awkwardness of the moment, Abigail felt warmth spread through her chest. When was the last time anyone had wanted her to stay? When had anyone looked at her the way these children were looking at her now, with simple, honest hope? Your biscuits are delicious, Mrs. Hodgson, Abigail said, trying to ease the tension. The housekeeper looked pleased despite herself. It's the buttermilk. Makes them tender, though Mr. Quinn here could burn water if you let him. I resent that, Quinn said mildly. My coffee's decent. Your coffee could wake the dead and make them wish they'd stayed buried, Mrs. Hodgson retorted, but there was affection in her tone. James giggled, and even Lily smiled. Abigail found herself relaxing slightly, the strangeness of the situation fading into something almost comfortable. This wasn't the life she'd planned, the dinner parties and social calls she'd imagined. But watching this small family tease each other gently, seeing the obvious care between them despite their grief, she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd stumbled into something better than plans. After supper, Mrs. Hodgson shooed everyone out of the kitchen so she could clean up. Quinn took the twins upstairs to get ready for bed, and Abigail found herself alone in the parlor, examining the books on a small shelf. They were a mix of practical volumes, guides to ranching and animal husbandry, and what looked like Martha's books. Poetry by Wordsworth, novels by Dickens, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Abigail pulled out the Austen novel, running her fingers over the cover. It had been read many times, she could tell. Loved. She was opening it to find an inscription when Quinn's voice made her look up. That was Martha's favorite. She must have read it a dozen times. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, please. He gestured for her to keep the book. She'd be happy knowing someone else was enjoying it. She always said books should be read, not just sit on shelves collecting dust. Abigail closed the book carefully. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. Quinn moved to the window, looking out into the darkness. Smart, funny, patient, especially with me. I was rough around the edges when we met, and she smoothed me out some, taught me to see beauty in things I'd taken for granted. He was quiet for a moment. The children ask for her every night. I tell them she's in heaven watching over them, but I don't think they really understand. How do you explain death to a 5-year-old? I don't know, Abigail said softly. My father died when I was 14. That was hard enough to understand, and I was much older than they are. Quinn turned to look at her. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult. It was. My mother and I, we had to learn to manage on our own. That's when I realized how little education prepares women for actual life. I could embroider a sampler and play the piano, but I had no idea how to handle finances or manage a household budget or any of the practical things we suddenly needed to know. Is that why you wanted to study medicine? To learn something practical? Partly. And partly because I saw how helpless we were when he got sick. The doctors couldn't save him, but they also couldn't explain what was happening in a way we could understand. I wanted to know, to have knowledge instead of just faith and hope. Quinn nodded slowly. Out here, you learn to be practical fast. Can't afford not to be. But knowledge, he smiled slightly. That's something I want my children to have. The ability to think clearly, to read and write well, to understand the world beyond this ranch. That's why I've been so desperate to find them a teacher. I'll do my best, Abigail said. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I'll try. That's all anyone can do. He moved toward the stairs. I should check on them. Bedtime's always a battle. Thank you again for helping with Moonlight. That meant more than you probably realize. After he left, Abigail sat for a while in the quiet parlor, Martha's book in her lap. She could hear Quinn's voice upstairs, low and gentle, and the twins' responses, their resistance to sleep gradually weakening. It was such a domestic scene, so far from anything she'd experienced. She thought about James Whitmore and his cold telegram, about the life she'd almost had in Seattle. That life would have been comfortable, predictable, empty. This life, if she chose to stay beyond the 2 weeks, would be none of those things. But watching Quinn with his children, seeing the fierce love tempered with grief, feeling the vast wild beauty of this land pressing in through every window, Abigail thought perhaps empty wasn't the worst thing a life could be. Eventually, she climbed the stairs to her small room. Mrs. Hodgson had left a lamp burning on the dresser, casting soft light over everything. Abigail changed into her nightgown and sat on the bed, looking once more out the window. The stars were incredible, thousands upon thousands of them, scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. She'd never seen so many stars. In Boston, the city lights dimmed them, but here they blazed with an intensity that took her breath away. As she watched, a shooting star streaked across the sky, brilliant and brief. "Make a wish," her father used to say when she was little. Abigail closed her eyes. She didn't wish to go back to Boston. She didn't wish that James Whitmore had married her after all. Instead, she wished for something she couldn't quite name, for belonging, perhaps, for purpose, for a life that mattered, for home. When she opened her eyes, the sky was still there, vast and star-filled and impossibly beautiful. And somewhere in this house, 2 children slept in their beds while their father kept watch over them, holding grief and hope in equal measure. Abigail lay down and pulled the quilt over herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties. But tonight, for the first time since reading that terrible telegram, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility, The weeks that followed their arrival at the Mackenzie Ranch slipped by with a rhythm Abigail had never known before. There was no leisurely breakfast in bed, no afternoon socials, no evenings spent embroidering by lamplight while servants moved quietly through the rooms. Instead, there were early mornings when the sky was still purple at the edges, the smell of coffee and wood smoke mingling in the crisp air. There were days filled with the sound of children's laughter and the scratch of chalk on slate. There were evenings when muscles she hadn't known she possessed ached with honest fatigue. It was nothing like Boston, nothing like the life she had imagined for herself. It was better. Abigail stood at the window of the small room that had become hers, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose. Beyond the glass, the Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly, rolling grassland dotted with sage, distant mountains purple against the horizon, and everywhere that enormous sky that made her feel both impossibly small and somehow part of something vast and eternal. "Miss Warren?" A small voice came from the doorway. "Are you awake?" Abigail turned to find Lily standing there in her nightgown, her red gold hair a tangled halo around her face, clutching a rag doll that Mrs. Hodgson had made for her. "I am," Abigail said, holding out her hand. "Come here, sweetheart. What are you doing up so early?" Lily patted across the room and climbed into Abigail's lap with the ease of a child who had already learned to trust her. She smelled of sleep and the lavender soap Mrs. Hodgson kept in the children's washroom. "I had a dream about Mama," Lily said quietly, her head against Abigail's shoulder. "She was in the garden, picking flowers. She was singing." Abigail's throat tightened. In the 6 weeks she had been at the ranch, the children had mentioned their mother only a handful of times, always in these quiet, unguarded moments. Quinn had told her that Martha had loved to sing, that she had filled the house with music. "That sounds like a beautiful dream," Abigail said softly, stroking Lily's hair. "It was." Lily was quiet for a moment, then added in a smaller voice, "But when I woke up, I couldn't remember what her singing sounded like anymore. I tried and tried, but I couldn't remember." The pain in those words broke Abigail's heart. She had been 17 when her father died, old enough to hold tight to every memory, every detail. But Lily was only 5. How much would she remember in another year, in 5 years, in 10? "Your mama's voice might fade a little," Abigail said carefully, "but the love she had for you, that never fades. It stays right here." She placed her hand gently over Lily's heart. "And every time you think of her, every time you remember something she taught you or something kind she did, that love gets stronger. Do you understand?" Lily nodded against her shoulder. They sat together in silence, watching the sunrise paint the world new, until James appeared in the doorway rubbing his eyes. "Is it time for lessons yet?" he asked hopefully. James had taken to reading with the enthusiasm of a prospector who'd struck gold, devouring every book Abigail could find in Quinn's modest library. "After breakfast," Abigail said, "go get dressed, both of you. I can smell Mrs. Hodgson's biscuits from here." The children scrambled off, their melancholy forgotten in the excitement of a new day, and Abigail rose to prepare herself. She had packed away her fine traveling dresses after the first week, when it became clear they were utterly impractical for ranch life. Mrs. Hodgson had helped her make over 2 simple calico dresses from fabric Quinn had brought back from town, and though they were far from fashionable, they were comfortable and serviceable. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand and paused, startled by her own reflection. Her skin had lost its city pallor, taking on a healthy glow from hours spent outdoors with the children. Her dark hair, which she had once spent an hour each morning arranging in elaborate styles, was now pulled back in a simple braid. She looked different, younger, perhaps, or maybe just more alive. When she made her way to the kitchen, she found the usual morning chaos in full swing. Mrs. Hodgson, a sturdy woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and capable hands, was pulling a pan of golden biscuits from the oven. The twins were at the table, arguing good-naturedly about who got to sit in which chair, and Quinn was by the stove, pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs. He looked up when Abigail entered, and something shifted in his expression, something warm and soft that made her pulse quicken. "Morning, Miss Warren," he said. "Coffee?" "Please." Abigail took the mug he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. She was aware of Mrs. Hodgson watching them with shrewd, knowing eyes, but the housekeeper said nothing, just smiled to herself and began slathering butter on the biscuits. They had fallen into this routine over the weeks: breakfast together before Quinn went out to work on the ranch, lessons for the children in the morning, outdoor time in the afternoon, dinner together in the evening. It felt domestic in a way that should have been strange, given that Abigail was an employee, not family. But somehow, it didn't feel strange at all. It felt natural, as if she had always been part of this household, part of this life. "I need to ride out to check the north pasture today," Quinn said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Should be back by early afternoon. If you need anything, we'll be fine," Abigail assured him. "I thought I'd take the children down to the creek after lessons. The weather's warm enough, and James has been asking to catch frogs again." "Can we, Papa?" James bounced in his seat. "Miss Warren said she'd help us make a proper house for them this time, with rocks and everything." "A temporary house," Abigail clarified quickly, seeing Quinn's expression. "We'll release them at the end of the day. I've been teaching them about habitats and ecosystems." Quinn's mouth quirked. "Of course you have." He reached over and ruffled James's hair. "All right, but you do what Miss Warren tells you. No wandering off, and stay away from the deep part where the current's strong." "We will," both children chorused. Mrs. Hodgson set the platter of biscuits on the table, along with a bowl of honey and a pot of jam she had made from wild berries. "Eat up, then. Growing children need their strength, and heaven knows these two never stop growing." They fell into the comfortable quiet of people eating together, punctuated by small requests for honey or jam, the scrape of knives on plates, the occasional comment about the day ahead. Abigail found herself studying the scene as if from outside herself. This makeshift family gathered around a scarred wooden table in a ranch house kitchen, morning light streaming through windows that looked out on endless prairie. 2 months ago, she had been preparing to marry a man she barely knew, to live a life of careful propriety in a city that felt like a cage. Now she was here, in this wild place, with these people who had somehow become dear to her without her quite noticing when it happened. When breakfast was finished and the dishes cleared, Quinn stood and retrieved his hat from its peg by the door. He paused there, his hand on the doorframe, looking back at his children. "Be good," he said. "Learn lots. Don't drive Miss Warren too crazy." "We're always good," Lily said with exaggerated innocence. "That's a matter of perspective," Quinn replied, but his eyes were warm. Then his gaze shifted to Abigail. "Thank you for everything." There was weight in those simple words, more meaning than a casual expression of gratitude. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's my job," she said lightly. "No," Quinn said quietly. "It's more than that, and we both know it." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him, and Abigail was left standing in the kitchen with Mrs. Hodgson's knowing eyes on her and her heart beating just a little too fast. "Right then," Mrs. Hodgson said briskly, though there was a smile playing at her lips. "Time for lessons, I'd say. Off you go, children. I'll bring tea in an hour." The morning lessons passed quickly. Abigail had discovered that both children were bright and eager to learn, though in different ways. James loved books and stories, could sit for an hour absorbed in reading. Lily was more restless, learning best when she could move, when lessons incorporated songs or games or hands-on activities. Today they were working on geography, and Abigail had drawn a map of the United States on the large slate board Quinn had hung in the room they used as a schoolroom. It had once been Martha's sewing room, Mrs. Hodgson had told her quietly, but Quinn had cleared it out shortly after Abigail's arrival, unable to bear the sight of his late wife's things gathering dust. "Now," Abigail said, pointing to the eastern seaboard, "this is where I'm from, Boston, Massachusetts. Can you find it, James?" James stepped up to the board, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, and carefully drew a small circle on the map. "There. Perfect. And how did I get from Boston to here, to Wyoming territory?" "You took a train." Lily bounced in her seat. "A big train that went chuff, chuff, chuff." "That's right. The train traveled west, through many states and territories. Can you trace the path you think it might have taken?" For the next 20 minutes, they talked about railroads and territories, about the different landscapes between the coasts, about the vast distances that made up their country. Abigail found herself thinking about her own journey, about how far she had come in every sense. Not just the miles, but the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. "Miss Warren?" Lily's voice broke into her thoughts. "Why did you come here? To Wyoming?" It was an innocent question, asked with childish curiosity, but it struck Abigail like a physical blow. She had never told the children, or Quinn, or Mrs. Hodgson, the full truth of what had brought her to Cheyenne Station that day. They knew she had been traveling, that her plans had changed, but no more than that. "I came because I needed a new start," Abigail said carefully. "Sometimes our plans don't work out the way we expect, and we have to find a new path." "Like when Mama died," James said matter-of-factly. "Papa says we had to find a new path without her." "Yes," Abigail said softly, "like that." "Are you glad you came here?" Lily asked, "even though your plans changed?" Abigail looked at both children, at their bright, curious faces, their red gold hair catching the light from the window, their eyes so like their father's. She thought of the past 6 weeks, of days spent teaching and playing and slowly, carefully helping these motherless children learn to smile again. She thought of quiet evenings when Quinn would sit with them after dinner and tell stories about his day, his voice low and warm. She thought of how this place, this wild and beautiful place, had somehow worked its way into her heart. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm very glad I came here." By the time they finished lessons and had lunch, the sun was high and warm, perfect for their expedition to the creek. Abigail changed into her oldest dress and sturdiest boots, then helped both children into clothes that could withstand mud and water. Mrs. Hodgson packed them a basket with bread, cheese, and apples, and they set off across the meadow. The creek was about a 15-minute walk from the house, winding through a small grove of cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade from the afternoon sun. The water ran clear over smooth stones, and Abigail could see why the children loved it. It was a perfect place for exploration and play. "Remember the rules?" she said as they reached the bank. "Stay where I can see you, no deeper than your knees, and if I call you, you come immediately." "Yes, Miss Warren," they chorused, already pulling off their boots. Abigail settled herself on a sun-warmed rock near the water's edge, close enough to supervise but far enough to let them play freely. She had brought a book, one of Quinn's, a volume of Emerson essays, but found herself watching the children instead of reading. They were so different from when she had first met them. Then they had been quiet and subdued, their grief a palpable weight. Now, splashing in the creek and laughing as they chased minnows, they looked like children should look, happy, carefree, full of life. Miss Warren, look!" James was holding something cupped in his hands. "I found the biggest frog." Abigail set down her book and waded into the creek, her skirts held high. Sure enough, James had captured an enormous bullfrog that was regarding them all with philosophical indifference. "That's a very impressive frog," Abigail said seriously. "What are you going to name him?" "George," James decided, "after George Washington, because he's big and important, and an excellent choice. Now, shall we build George a temporary home?" They spent the next hour constructing an elaborate frog habitat from rocks and sticks and water plants, with Abigail helping them understand what frogs needed to be comfortable. It turned into an impromptu science lesson about amphibians, about life cycles and ecosystems, and the children absorbed it all with enthusiasm. "You're a good teacher," a voice said from behind them. Abigail spun around, startled, and found Quinn standing at the edge of the creek. He must have approached silently while they were absorbed in their work. His hat was pushed back on his head, and there was something in his expression, something warm and soft and just a little sad. "Papa?" Lily abandoned George the frog and splashed through the water toward her father. "We're learning about amphibians." "Amphibians," Abigail corrected gently, then looked at Quinn. "You're back early. Finished quicker than I thought." He scooped Lily up despite her wet feet and clothes, "And I remembered you'd mentioned coming down here. Thought I'd join you, if that's all right." "Of course." Quinn set Lily down and moved to where James was guarding George with solemn dedication. Father and son bent over the makeshift frog habitat, their heads close together, their identical postures making Abigail's heart squeeze. Quinn listened intently as James explained every detail of George's accommodations, asking questions that showed genuine interest, not just paternal indulgence. Watching them, Abigail felt something shift inside her, a recognition of something she had been trying not to acknowledge for weeks now. She cared about these children, yes, but what she felt when she looked at Quinn Mackenzie was something entirely different, something deeper and more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. She cared about him too, was falling for him, if she was honest with herself, for his quiet strength and his gentle way with his children, for the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered, for the small kindnesses he showed, the way he always poured her coffee in the morning, the books he brought back from town because he thought she might like them, the way he looked at her sometimes as if she was something precious and unexpected. It was foolish. She had no reason to think his feelings ran deeper than gratitude and respect. "Miss Warren?" Quinn was looking at her with concern. "Are you all right? You look flushed. Too much sun?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just warm. Maybe we should head back." "In a minute." Quinn straightened, brushing his hands on his trousers. "James, Lily, why don't you two show George the shady side of his new home? Make sure he's got everything he needs before we release him." The children scampered off, and Quinn turned to Abigail. They stood in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, the sound of running water and children's voices a gentle backdrop. "I want to thank you," Quinn said quietly, "for what you've done for them, for bringing life back into this house." "They're wonderful children," Abigail replied. "It's easy to care for them." "It's more than that." Quinn took a step closer, his blue eyes intense on hers. "You've given them back their childhood. After Martha died, they just shut down, stopped laughing, stopped playing. Mrs. Hodgson and I, we tried everything, but nothing worked. Then you came along, and within a week they were smiling again. Within 2 weeks they were laughing. Now look at them." Abigail followed his gaze to where the twins were carefully arranging leaves around George's habitat, their heads bent together, their voices bright with excitement. "They needed time," she said, "and someone who could be there for them consistently. I just happened to be that person." "No." Quinn's voice was firm. "You're not just that person. You're exactly the right person. Don't sell yourself short, Abigail." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his rough voice sent warmth flooding through her. "Quinn," she started, but didn't know how to finish. "I know this isn't what you signed on for," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you came here desperate and running from something. I still don't know what. And I won't ask unless you want to tell me. But I want you to know that you're not just an employee here. You're part of us now. Part of this family. And I hope to God you don't want to leave, because I don't know what we'd do without you." The vulnerability in his words, the raw honesty, made Abigail's throat tight. She wanted to tell him everything, about James Whitmore's telegram, about her ruined wedding plans, about arriving in Cheyenne with nowhere to go and no hope left. She wanted to tell him that she had never felt more at home anywhere than she did here on this dusty ranch with its endless sky and its makeshift family. But before she could speak, Lily called out, "Papa, Miss Warren, come see. George jumped right over his rock wall." The moment broke, and Quinn smiled ruefully. "Duty calls," he said. "But Abigail, think about what I said." He moved toward the children, leaving Abigail standing alone in the dappled shade, her heart racing and her mind whirling with everything he had said and everything she wanted to say in return. That evening, after the children were in bed and Mrs. Hodgson had retired to her small cottage behind the main house, Abigail found herself unable to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the front porch, drawn by the enormity of the night sky. The stars were incredible here, away from city lights, thousands upon thousands of them scattered across the darkness like diamond dust. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of coyotes calling to each other across the prairie. Couldn't sleep either? Abigail turned to find Quinn emerging from the house, a cup of what smelled like whiskey in his hand. He gestured to the porch swing. "Mind if I join you?" "Please." They sat together in companionable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as Quinn set it in motion with one foot. Abigail was intensely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the solid strength of him, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers as they swayed. "I come out here most nights," Quinn said eventually. "After Martha died, I couldn't stand being in that empty bed staring at the ceiling. So I'd come out here and watch the stars and try to figure out how to keep going." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. "It's better now, easier, because of you. Quinn, Let me say this," he interrupted gently. "I need to say it, and I need you to hear it. When Martha died, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just go through the motions of living for the sake of the children, but never really feel anything again. Then you showed up on that platform, looking lost and scared and so damn brave, and something in me recognized something in you." He turned to look at her, his face shadowed but his eyes catching the starlight. "I'm not saying this right," he continued. "I'm not good with words like you are, but what I'm trying to say is that somewhere along the way, you stopped being the governess and started being more. You're the person I want to tell about my day, the person whose opinion I value, the person who makes me think about the future instead of just surviving the present." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've developed feelings for you, Abigail Warren, deep feelings. The kind that scare me because I didn't think I'd ever feel them again." He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see an employee. I see a woman I admire and respect. A woman I could—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "A woman I could love, if she'd let me." The world seemed to stop. Abigail could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cool night air on her face, could see the vulnerability in Quinn's eyes as he waited for her response. "I came here broken," she said quietly. "I was supposed to marry someone, a man I barely knew, arranged by our families. I traveled all the way from Boston, and when I arrived, there was a telegram waiting. He'd found someone else, didn't want me anymore. I was stranded with nowhere to go and no future. I felt worthless, discarded." Quinn's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just listened. "Then you appeared with your children," Abigail continued, "and you offered me a chance. Not pity, a chance. To be useful, to have purpose, to matter to someone. And these past weeks working with James and Lily, being part of your household. Quinn, I've been happier here than I ever was in Boston, than I ever was in my entire life." "But?" Quinn prompted gently when she paused. "But I'm terrified," Abigail admitted. "I'm terrified of these feelings I have for you, of how much I care about you and the children, of how much it would destroy me if I lost this, lost all of you. You won't lose us." Quinn reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Abigail, life out here is hard and uncertain. I can't promise you it'll be easy, but I can promise you that if you choose to stay, not as an employee but as something more, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice." Abigail looked down at their joined hands, at the way his rough fingers intertwined with her smoother ones. Everything in her life had led to this moment. All the disappointments and rejections, all the fear and uncertainty. It had all brought her here, to this porch, to this man, to this choice. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "With you and your children, with this life. I think I started falling that first day on the platform." Quinn made a sound low in his throat, relief and joy and something deeper, and lifted her hand to his lips. "Thank God," he breathed against her knuckles. "Thank God." They sat there in the starlight, hands clasped, the enormity of what they had just admitted settling over them like a blessing. Abigail felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. She had come west expecting to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found a home, a family, and a love she had never imagined possible. "What happens now?" she asked. Quinn smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Now? Now we take it day by day. We court properly. Mrs. Hodgson will insist on that. We give the children time to adjust to the idea. We build something real and lasting, not rushed or forced." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "And when the time is right, when you're ready and sure, I'm going to ask you to be my wife. Not out of convenience or necessity, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you." "The time is right now," Abigail said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'm sure now. I've been alone and adrift for so long, Quinn. I don't want to waste another moment being afraid of happiness." Quinn cupped her face with his free hand, his touch infinitely gentle. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Abigail didn't want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. It wasn't her first kiss, but it felt like the first one that truly mattered, the first one that was given freely rather than expected by propriety. When they finally drew apart, both breathing a little unsteadily, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered, "not in 6 months or a year. Marry me this autumn, when the leaves turn gold and the air is crisp. Marry me and be a mother to my children and a partner in my life." "Yes," Abigail said, and laughed through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." They stayed on the porch until the stars began to fade and the eastern sky lightened toward dawn, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. And when the first birds began to sing and the world started to wake, Quinn walked Abigail to her door and kissed her once more before they parted. Abigail climbed into her bed as the sun rose, but sleep was impossible. She lay there watching the light strengthen, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 6 weeks. She had come west as a rejected bride with no hope and no future. Now she was going to marry a man she loved, become a mother to 2 beautiful children, build a life in this wild and wonderful place. The wedding dress in her trunk, that symbol of her old dreams and old disappointments, no longer held any power over her. She would burn it, or remake it, or simply pack it away. It didn't matter. That life, those expectations, that woman who had stepped off the train in Cheyenne, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone stronger and braver and infinitely more alive, someone who had found home in the last place she expected to look. The morning after Quinn's proposal found Abigail standing in the kitchen with Mrs. Hodgson, who had taken one look at her face and immediately sat her down with a cup of strong tea and a knowing smile. "He asked you then," Mrs. Hodgson said. It wasn't a question. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks. "How did you know?" "Child, I've got eyes in my head. I've watched that man look at you like you hung the moon for weeks now. And you're not much better, stealing glances at him when you think no one's watching." The older woman's expression softened. "I'm happy for you both, truly. Martha would have been too. She'd want him to find love again, to give those babies a mother who adores them." The mention of Martha sent a small tremor of anxiety through Abigail's chest. "Do you think the children will accept me? Not just as their teacher, but as their father's wife? As someone who might try to fill their mother's place?" Mrs. Hodgson reached across the table and patted her hand. "You're not filling Martha's place, dear. You're making a new place, all your own. And those children, they already love you. I see it in how Lily runs to you when she's scared, how James saves up his questions all day just to ask you. You've already become essential to them. Making it official will just be putting words to what already is." Before Abigail could respond, the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs announced the twins' arrival. They burst into the kitchen, still in their nightclothes, hair askew, faces bright with the particular energy of children who had slept well and were ready to greet the day. "Is Papa still here?" James asked, climbing into his usual chair. "I want to show him my drawing of George the Frog." "He's in the barn tending to the horses," Mrs. Hodgson said, setting bowls of oatmeal in front of both children. "He'll be in shortly." Lily turned her attention to Abigail, studying her with those unnervingly perceptive blue eyes. "Miss Warren, you look different today. You look sparkly." "Sparkly?" Abigail couldn't help but laugh. "Like how the creek looks when the sun hits it," Lily explained seriously. "All bright and pretty and happy." Mrs. Hodgson made a noise that might have been a suppressed chuckle, and Abigail felt her cheeks burn even hotter. But before she could formulate a response, the kitchen door opened and Quinn stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of hay and horses and the cool morning air. His eyes found Abigail's immediately, and the warmth in them made her heart skip. Whatever he saw in her face made his mouth curve into a small, private smile that was just for her. "Morning, all," he said, hanging his hat by the door. "Something smells good." "Oatmeal with honey and cinnamon," Mrs. Hodgson announced. "Sit down before it gets cold." They gathered around the table as they had done every morning for weeks, but everything felt different to Abigail now. Every glance Quinn sent her way carried new meaning. Every accidental brush of hands as they passed dishes felt charged with promise. She was acutely aware of the children watching them, of Mrs. Hodgson's knowing eyes, of the secret that sat between her and Quinn like a living thing. "Papa," James said through a mouthful of oatmeal, "can Miss Warren come with us to town next week, when we go for supplies?" Quinn glanced at Abigail. "Would you like to?" "Very much," Abigail said. "I've barely seen Cheyenne since the day I arrived." Since the day everything changed, she thought, but didn't say. Then it settled. Quinn's knee bumped against hers under the table, a gentle touch that sent warmth flooding through her. "We'll make a day of it. Maybe stop at the hotel for lunch." "Can we have pie?" Lily asked hopefully. "We'll see." After breakfast, as Mrs. Hodgson began clearing dishes and the children ran off to get dressed, Quinn caught Abigail's hand and drew her aside into the small parlor. "I couldn't sleep last night," he said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Kept thinking maybe I dreamed the whole thing. You saying yes. Us planning a future together." "I couldn't sleep either," Abigail admitted. "I kept waiting to wake up and find myself back in Boston, or on that train platform, or anywhere but here, having this impossible, wonderful thing actually be real." Quinn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "It's real. And I want to tell the children today, if you're ready." Abigail's stomach fluttered with nerves. "What if they're not happy about it? What if they feel like I'm trying to replace their mother?" "They won't feel that way," Quinn said with quiet certainty. "But if they need time to adjust, we'll give them time. There's no rush. We can take this as slow as they need." "But you said autumn," Abigail reminded him. "That's only 2 months away." "Then we'll wait longer if we need to." "Abigail, I've already found you. I can wait as long as it takes to make this right for everyone." He cupped her face gently. "The children come first. Always." It was one of the things she loved about him, this absolute devotion to James and Lily, this willingness to put their needs above his own wants. Any lingering doubts Abigail had about accepting his proposal evaporated in the face of that selfless love. "Let's tell them now," she said. Together. They found the twins in the schoolroom, where James was arranging his slate and chalk, while Lily attempted to braid her doll's yarn hair. Both children looked up when their father and Abigail entered, and something in their expressions must have signaled that this wasn't a normal visit. "Are we in trouble?" James asked cautiously. "No, son." Quinn settled himself on one of the small chairs, looking comically large in the child-sized furniture. Abigail took the other chair, and both children drifted closer, curiosity replacing concern. "Miss Warren and I want to talk to you about something important," Quinn began. "Something that's going to change things for our family." Lily's eyes went wide. "Is Miss Warren leaving?" The panic in her voice made Abigail's heart clench. She reached out and took the little girl's hand. "No, sweetheart, I'm not leaving. Just the opposite, actually. Your father and I—" Abigail glanced at Quinn, who nodded encouragingly. "We've become very close these past weeks, and we've discovered that we care about each other quite a lot. In fact, we've fallen in love." James and Lily looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them, as it often did with twins. Then James turned back to them. "Like in the stories?" he asked. "Like when the prince loves the princess?" "Yes," Quinn said, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Like in the stories. And because we love each other, and because I love you two more than anything in this world, I've asked Miss Warren to marry me, to become my wife and your—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "To become part of our family in a more permanent way." "You'd be our new mama?" Lily asked, her voice very small. This was the moment Abigail had been dreading. She slid off her chair and knelt on the floor, so she was eye level with both children. "I would never try to replace your mama," she said gently. "Your mama loved you so much, and she'll always be your mama. Nothing can change that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be another person who loves you and takes care of you, someone who will always be here for you. Does that sound all right?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, her small face serious and thoughtful in a way that was heartbreaking in one so young. Then she said, "When Mama died, I was scared all the time. The house felt too quiet and Papa was sad and everything was wrong. But then you came and it got better. You read to us and taught us things, and you hugged me when I had nightmares. You made it not hurt so much." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. "Oh, sweetheart. So if you marry Papa and stay forever, then it won't ever hurt that bad again, right?" Lily's voice wavered. "You won't go away like Mama did?" Quinn made a sound low in his throat and pulled Lily into his arms. "Baby girl, Miss Warren isn't sick. She's going to be here for a very, very long time." "Forever?" Lily asked, her face pressed against her father's chest. Abigail touched her soft red gold hair. "Forever," she promised. "I'm not going anywhere." James had been quiet through all of this, his face scrunched up in the expression he wore when he was thinking hard. Finally, he looked at his father. "Papa, if you marry Miss Warren, will you be happy again, like you were before Mama died?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Quinn's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at his son. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "I think I will be. She makes me happy, James, and I hope I make her happy too." "You do," Abigail said softly. "Very much." James nodded slowly, seeming to process this. Then he turned to Abigail. "Can I still call you Miss Warren?" "I like calling you Miss Warren." Relief and affection flooded through her. "You can call me whatever feels right to you. Miss Warren, Miss Abigail, or someday, if you want to, you could call me Mama. But there's no rush. We'll figure it out together." "Together," James repeated, trying out the word. Then, with the resilience of childhood, he brightened. "Does this mean we get to have a wedding? With cake?" Quinn laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Yes, there will definitely be cake." "Can I wear a fancy dress?" Lily asked, perking up. "The fanciest dress we can find," Abigail promised. Just like that, the tension broke. The children began pelting them with questions about the wedding, about where they would live after getting married, about whether Abigail would still teach them lessons, about a dozen other things that mattered intensely in the moment. Quinn and Abigail answered each question patiently, watching the children's excitement build, seeing them begin to embrace this new reality. It wasn't until much later, after lessons were done and the children were playing outside under Mrs. Hodgson's watchful eye, that Abigail allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. She stood at the parlor window watching James and Lily chase each other through the meadow grass and felt Quinn's presence behind her before his arms came around her waist. "That went better than I dared hope," he murmured against her hair. Abigail leaned back against his solid warmth. "They're remarkable children. You've raised them well." "We'll raise them well," Quinn corrected. "Together." Together. That word again, so simple and yet so full of promise. Abigail turned in his arms and looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, who had offered her not just employment but purpose, not just shelter, but home. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now that she'd said them once. "I don't think I've ever really understood what that meant before, but I do now. I love you, Quinn Mackenzie." His kiss was slow and deep and full of promises about their future. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. 2 months until autumn," he said. "Think that's enough time to plan a wedding?" "We'll make it enough time," Abigail replied. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity and emotion. News of their engagement spread through the small ranching community with the speed of wildfire, and Abigail found herself the subject of intense curiosity from neighbors she'd never met. Some came by ostensibly to welcome her, though she suspected they really just wanted to get a look at the mysterious Eastern woman who had captured Quinn Mackenzie's heart. Others brought gifts, preserves, and quilts, and offers to help with wedding preparations. Mrs. Hodgson took charge of the practical matters with efficient enthusiasm, making lists and consulting with Abigail about everything from flowers to food to where exactly the ceremony should take place. It was decided that they would marry at the ranch, outdoors if weather permitted, with Reverend Walsh from Cheyenne presiding and the whole community invited. "It's not Boston society," Mrs. Hodgson said one afternoon as they sat together working on Abigail's wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream silk that Mrs. Hodgson was helping her sew. "Folks out here don't stand on ceremony the way they do back east, but they're good people, and they'll want to celebrate with you proper." "I don't want Boston society," Abigail said, her needle moving through the delicate fabric. "I want exactly this: real people, genuine warmth, a celebration that means something." The dress was nothing like the elaborate creation that still lay in her trunk, the one she'd brought from Boston for a marriage that never happened. That dress, with its layers of silk and lace and pearl buttons, represented everything she'd left behind: the false dreams, the arranged future, the life lived for others' expectations. This new dress was simpler, more practical, more her. One evening, about 3 weeks after their engagement, Abigail finally opened that trunk and pulled out the old wedding dress. It seemed to belong to another person, another life. The fabric was still perfect, the lace still beautiful, but it held no power over her anymore. She carried it downstairs to where Quinn was in his study, working on the ranch's account books. He looked up when she entered, and his expression grew serious when he saw what she was holding. "Is that the dress I was supposed to wear when I married James Whitmore?" Abigail confirmed. She held it up, studying it in the lamplight. "I've been trying to decide what to do with it. Mrs. Hodgson suggested we could use the fabric for something else, or I could save it for Lily when she's grown. But I think—" She paused, gathering her courage. "I think I'd like to burn it." Quinn set down his pen and came around the desk. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. It represents everything I was running from, everything that made me feel small and worthless and trapped. I don't want any part of that old life in our new one." Abigail met his eyes. "I want to let it go completely, start fresh." Understanding dawned in Quinn's face. "Then let's burn it. Together." They went outside into the cool evening, the dress bundled in Abigail's arms. Quinn built a fire in the stone circle they sometimes used for outdoor cooking, and as the flames grew strong, Abigail stood before them with the dress that had once meant so much and now meant nothing at all. "Any last words?" Quinn asked gently, standing beside her. Abigail thought about James Whitmore, about his cold telegram and colder heart. She thought about the girl she'd been on that train platform, desperate and alone and convinced her life was over. Then she thought about who she was now, loved, valued, part of something real and lasting. "Thank you," she said to the dress, to James Whitmore, to that whole abandoned future. "Thank you for not working out. Thank you for bringing me here, to this place, to this man, to this life. I wouldn't change any of it now." She tossed the dress into the flames. The silk caught immediately, the fire consuming the expensive fabric with hungry enthusiasm. The lace blackened and curled. The pearl buttons popped in the heat. Within minutes, there was nothing left but ash and memory, and even the memory was fading, losing its sting. Quinn's arm came around her waist, solid and warm and real. "Feel better?" "Yes," Abigail said, and meant it. "I feel free." They stood together watching the fire burn down, and when the last ember died, they went back inside hand in hand. The past was truly past now. Only the future remained. As autumn approached, the character of the ranch changed. The summer heat gave way to crisp mornings and cool evenings. The grassland turned gold, and the cottonwood trees along the creek burst into brilliant yellow. The sky seemed bigger somehow, bluer, as if the whole world was putting on its finest clothes for the coming celebration. The children threw themselves into wedding preparations with enthusiasm. Lily insisted on making decorations, filling the house with chains of paper flowers and drawings of brides and grooms. James took his role as ring bearer with deadly seriousness, practicing his walk up the makeshift aisle dozens of times until he had it perfect. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Abigail was in the children's room helping Lily choose which ribbons to wear in her hair for the ceremony when she heard crying from across the hall. She found James sitting on his bed, tears streaming down his face, clutching a small framed photograph. "James?" Sweetheart, what's wrong? He looked up at her with heartbroken eyes. I can't remember her voice, he sobbed. Lily said she couldn't remember Mama's singing, and I said I could remember everything, but I can't. I can't remember what she sounded like when she read to us at night. I can't remember what she said when she tucked us in. It's all going away, and I can't stop it. Abigail's heart broke. She sat down beside him and pulled him into her arms. This little boy who was trying so hard to be brave, to be strong, to hold on to a mother who was slipping away no matter how tight he held on. Oh, James, I'm so sorry. That must be so scary. What if I forget everything? His voice was muffled against her shoulder. What if I forget her completely? Will that mean I didn't love her enough? No, sweetheart, that's not how it works. Abigail held him tighter, searching for the right words. Memories fade sometimes. That's natural and normal and doesn't mean anything about how much you loved her. But you know what doesn't fade? James pulled back to look at her, his face streaked with tears. What? The shape she left in your heart. The way she taught you to be kind and brave. The fact that when you help your sister without being asked, or when you work hard at your lessons, or when you show compassion to animals, that's all her. She's still here, James. Not in memories you can touch or sounds you can hear, but in who you are, and who you're becoming. Do you understand? James thought about this, his young face serious. So even if I can't remember her voice, she's still with me? Always. In everything good about you, she's there. Abigail wiped the tears from his cheeks. And James? It's okay to let new memories crowd out some of the old ones. It doesn't mean you loved her less. It means you're living and growing and letting your heart make room for new people to love. That's what she would want. Do you think she'd like you? James asked suddenly. If she could meet you. The question caught Abigail off guard. She thought about Martha Mackenzie, who she knew only through stories and the mark she'd left on this household. A woman who had loved music and laughter, who had kept a beautiful garden, who had raised these two wonderful children for 5 short years before fever took her away. I hope she would, Abigail said honestly. I hope she'd know that I love her children with everything I have, that I would never try to erase her or make them forget her, that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift she left behind. James was quiet for a moment. Then he wrapped his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. I'm glad Papa found you, he whispered. I'm glad you're going to be our mama too. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. I'm glad too, sweetheart. So very glad. That night, after the children were asleep, Abigail told Quinn about her conversation with James. They were on the porch swing again, their favorite place for these quiet talks, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. He's worried about forgetting her, Abigail said, about what it means if the memories fade. Quinn was silent for a long time, his arm around Abigail's shoulders, his eyes on the distant stars. I worry about that too, he finally admitted. Not for myself. I'll carry Martha with me until I die. But for them. They were so young when she passed. I'm terrified they'll grow up with only the vaguest sense of who she was. Then we'll make sure they don't, Abigail said firmly. We'll tell them stories about her. We'll show them the things she made, the garden she loved, the songs she sang. We'll keep her memory alive not by trying to freeze time, but by celebrating the life she lived and the legacy she left. Quinn pulled her closer. How did I get so lucky? To lose one remarkable woman and then find another? I'm not Martha, Abigail said softly. I'll never be Martha. I'll just be me. I know, and that's exactly what I need, what we all need. Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. God, I can't wait to marry you. 5 more days, Abigail reminded him. 5 days too long. The day before the wedding, the ranch was overtaken by helpful neighbors and organized chaos. Women arrived to help clean and cook and decorate. Men set up tables and benches for the outdoor ceremony. Children ran everywhere, getting underfoot and excited. Mrs. Hodgson directed it all like a general commanding troops, her face flushed with happiness and exertion. Abigail stood in the midst of it all, feeling slightly overwhelmed and deeply moved. These people, most of whom she'd met only in passing, had come to celebrate her marriage, to welcome her officially into their community. It was so different from the cold, formal affair her Boston wedding would have been. This was real. This was family. even if not by blood. Quite a circus, isn't it? A voice said beside her. Abigail turned to find a petite woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair standing there. She looked vaguely familiar, and after a moment Abigail placed her. She'd been at the ranch once before, bringing preserves and offering congratulations. Mrs. Walsh, Abigail said, extending her hand. Thank you so much for coming and for all your help. Call me Helen, please. We're going to be neighbors, after all. Helen's smile was warm. I wanted to talk to you for a moment, if you have time, about Martha. Abigail's stomach tightened nervously, but she nodded. They stepped away from the bustle, walking toward the garden that Martha had once tended and that Abigail had been slowly learning to maintain. I was Martha's closest friend, Helen said quietly. Knew her since we were girls. When she got sick, I was with her at the end. She paused, her eyes on the flowering plants that were preparing for their winter rest. She made me promise something, made me swear that if Quinn ever found someone new, I would tell that woman not to feel guilty, not to feel like she was betraying Martha or stealing her place. Abigail felt tears prick at her eyes. Martha loved Quinn more than life itself, Helen continued, but she knew him, knew he wasn't meant to be alone, knew those children needed a mother, and in her last hours, when the fever was burning through her and she could barely speak, she made me promise to tell any woman Quinn might love in the future that she had Martha's blessing, that Martha's only wish was for her family to be happy and loved and whole again. A tear slipped down Abigail's cheek. Thank you for telling me that. You've made them happy again, Helen said, turning to look at her directly. I can see it in Quinn's face, hear it in how those children laugh now. Martha would be so grateful to you for that. So don't carry guilt, Abigail. Carry joy. That's what she'd want. The two women embraced, and in that moment Abigail felt a connection across time to the woman she'd never met. The woman whose place she was taking but whose shoes she would never quite fill. And that was all right. She didn't need to be Martha. She just needed to be herself, loving this family with her whole heart. That evening, after all the helpers had gone and the ranch was quiet again, Quinn found Abigail in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and the air smelled of earth and autumn and possibilities. Tomorrow, he said, taking her hands in his, tomorrow you become my wife. Tomorrow, Abigail agreed, her heart full almost to bursting. Are you nervous? Terrified, Quinn admitted with a crooked smile. Not about marrying you. I've never been more sure of anything. But about whether I can be the husband you deserve, whether I can make you as happy as you've made us. Abigail reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palms, seeing the vulnerability in those remarkable blue eyes. Quinn Mackenzie, you have given me everything. A home when I had none, purpose when I was lost, a family when I was alone, love when I thought I'd never find it. You've already made me happier than I ever imagined possible. He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring vows and celebration, community and commitment. But tonight, in this quiet moment, they already belonged to each other completely. When they finally drew apart, Quinn pulled something from his pocket. I have something for you, something I want you to wear tomorrow. It was a small velvet box, worn with age. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small sapphire stone. It was my grandmother's, Quinn said. She gave it to my mother, who gave it to me before she died. I gave it to Martha when we married, and she wore it until... He swallowed hard. She wanted it to go to James's wife someday, but I hope, she'd understand why I want to give it to you instead. Quinn, I can't. Yes, you can. His voice was firm. You're not replacing Martha. You're starting something new while honoring what came before. This ring represents family, continuity, love that lasts beyond one lifetime. It's perfect for you. Abigail looked at the ring, catching the last light of day in its blue depths. It was beautiful and meaningful and exactly right. I'll be honored to wear it, she said softly. Quinn slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They stood together in the gathering darkness, hands joined, the ring catching starlight now instead of sunset, and Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Dawn broke clear and golden on Abigail's wedding day, the kind of perfect autumn morning that seemed designed by Providence itself. She woke to find Lily already in her room, sitting at the foot of her bed with wide, excited eyes. "Is it time yet?" the little girl whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow delay the day's events. Abigail smiled and held out her arms. Lily scrambled up the bed and snuggled against her, warm and solid and real. "Almost time, sweetheart. Are you excited?" "So excited I can't hardly breathe," Lily confessed. "Mrs. Hodgson says I have to sit still while she does my hair, but I don't know if I can. There's too much bouncing inside me." "I know the feeling," Abigail admitted. She had barely slept, her mind too full of everything that was about to happen, her heart too full of joy to find rest. "Where's your brother?" "With Papa in the barn. Papa said he had man things to discuss with James before the wedding." Lily rolled her eyes with all the drama a 5-year-old could muster. "I think they're just hiding because they're nervous." "Your father is nervous?" "He burned the biscuits this morning. Papa never burns biscuits unless something big is happening." Lily sat up and looked at Abigail with sudden seriousness. "Miss Warren, I mean Mama Abigail." She tried out the name carefully, testing how it felt. "You're really going to stay forever, right? You promise?" Abigail's throat tightened. She took Lily's small hands in hers. "I promise. Forever and always. Nothing will take me away from you." "Not even if you get sick like Mama Martha did?" The fear in those words, the trauma that still lurked beneath the surface of these resilient children, made Abigail want to weep. But she kept her voice steady and sure. "I'm going to do everything I can to stay healthy and strong for a very, very long time. I want to see you grow up, Lily. I want to see you learn to read big books and ride horses, and maybe even have children of your own someday. I want to be here for all of it." Lily threw her arms around Abigail's neck. "I love you, Mama Abigail." It was the first time either child had called her any variation of mother, and the words hit Abigail with the force of a physical blow. She held Lily tight, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "I love you too, my sweet girl, so very much." Mrs. Hodgson found them like that a few minutes later and made a tutting sound. Now, none of that crying before we've even started on your face. Save the tears for the ceremony." But her own eyes were suspiciously bright as she shooed Lily out of the room. "Go on, child. Your breakfast is getting cold, and we've got a mountain of work ahead of us." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Nutt, Hodgson, and Helen Walsh descended on Abigail with the focused intensity of women on a mission, helping her bathe and dress, arranging her dark hair in an elegant style that was simpler than Boston fashion but suited her far better. The cream silk dress fit perfectly, its simple lines emphasizing her figure without the fussy ornamentation of her old wedding gown. Around her neck she wore a delicate gold locket that had been her mother's, and on her finger Quinn's grandmother's sapphire ring caught the light. "Oh, my dear," Helen breathed when Abigail was finally ready. "You look absolutely beautiful." Abigail studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She had changed so much in the 3 months since arriving in Wyoming. Her face had filled out slightly, losing the gaunt look of stress and unhappiness. Her eyes were brighter, her posture more confident. She looked like a woman who knew her worth, who had found her place in the world. She looked like someone worthy of love. "I wish my mother could see this," Abigail said softly. Before leaving Boston, she had written to her mother explaining everything, the failed engagement, the new position, and eventually Quinn's proposal. Her mother's response had been cautiously supportive, tinged with worry about Abigail's impulsive decisions, but ultimately blessing her choice. There hadn't been time or money for her mother to make the journey west, but Abigail felt her presence anyway, a warmth in her heart that spoke of approval and love. "She'd be so proud," Mrs. Hodgson said firmly, adjusting a final pin in Abigail's hair. "Now, I'm going to check on those children and make sure they haven't gotten themselves dirty. The ceremony starts in an hour, and heaven help us all if we're not ready." Left alone for a moment, Abigail moved to the window and looked out at the scene below. Neighbors had been arriving all morning, their wagons parked in neat rows near the barn. Long tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, roasted meats and fresh bread, pies and cakes, preserves and pickles. Someone had strung bunting between the trees, bright against the golden autumn leaves. Wooden benches were arranged in rows facing a simple arch that Quinn and some of the neighbors had built, wound through with the last of the season's wildflowers. It was nothing like the elaborate Boston wedding that had been planned for her marriage to James Whitmore. There would be no cathedral with soaring ceilings, no orchestra, no five-course dinner on china so fine you could see through it. There would be no society matrons judging every detail, no carefully calculated guest list designed to cement social connections. This was better. This was real. This was hers. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Quinn, and the breath left Abigail's lungs. He wore a new suit, dark wool that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame, and his hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was the expression in his eyes as he looked at her that made her heart stutter. Raw wonder mixed with love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. "Quinn," she breathed, "you're not supposed to see me before the ceremony." "I know, but I needed to give you something, and I couldn't wait." He crossed the room to her, moving with that particular grace that always surprised her in such a large man. From his pocket, he drew a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the edges. "This is for you, but you have to promise not to read it until later, after everything is over and we're alone." Abigail took the paper, feeling the weight of whatever words it contained. "What is it?" "Everything I feel for you that I'm not good enough with words to say out loud. Everything I want our life to be. Everything I promise you." His hands came up to frame her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "Abigail Warren, you saved my life the day you saved my daughter. You gave me back the ability to feel something other than grief. You gave my children their laughter back. You gave us all hope. Quinn, let me finish." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know I'm not what you imagined when you dreamed about marriage. I'm rough around the edges. I work with my hands. I don't know fancy words or city ways. But I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of the gift of your love." "You already are," Abigail whispered, her hands coming up to cover his. "You already are, and you always have been. I didn't imagine you, Quinn Mackenzie, because I didn't know enough to imagine someone this good, this real, this right for me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Abigail tasted salt and realized they were both crying. When they finally drew apart, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "1 hour," he said. "1 hour, and you'll be my wife." "I'm already yours," Abigail replied. "The ceremony is just making it official." After Quinn left, reluctantly, looking back at her 3 times before he finally closed the door, Abigail carefully tucked his letter into her bodice, close to her heart. Whatever words he had written, she would treasure them. But the truth was, he had already shown her everything she needed to know through his actions, his devotion, his unwavering care for her and his children. Mrs. Hodgson returned with both twins in tow, and Abigail's breath caught at the sight of them. Lily wore a dress of soft blue cotton with white ribbons in her carefully curled hair, carrying a small basket of wildflowers. James was dressed in miniature version of his father's suit, his red gold hair slicked back, trying so hard to look grown up and serious despite the excitement dancing in his eyes. "Oh, my darlings," Abigail said, kneeling down despite Mrs. Hodgson's protests about wrinkling her dress. "You both look absolutely perfect." "Do you really think so?" Lily asked anxiously. "Mrs. Hodgson said I have to be very careful not to spill my flowers before we get to the ceremony part." "I know you'll do beautifully." Abigail looked at James. "And you, sir, are the most handsome ring bearer I've ever seen." James's chest puffed up with pride. "Papa gave me the rings and said I had the most important job of anyone because without the rings, you can't get married proper." "That's absolutely true," Abigail agreed solemnly. "Miss Warren," James's voice dropped to a whisper, and his eyes grew serious. "I'm glad you're marrying Papa. I'm glad you're going to be our mama. I think Mama Martha would be glad too." Abigail pulled both children into her arms, holding them tight, breathing in the scent of their hair and the solid warmth of their small bodies. These children who had lost so much, who had been so brave, who had opened their hearts to her despite their fear of losing someone else they loved. They were hers now, as surely as if she had given birth to them. She would protect them, nurture them, love them for the rest of her life. "I promise you both," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that I will be the best mother I know how to be. I won't always get it right, but I will always, always love you with my whole heart." "We know," Lily said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. The sound of music drifted through the window. Someone had brought a fiddle and was playing a sweet, simple melody. Mrs. Hodgson glanced outside and nodded with satisfaction. "Time," she announced. "Everyone's gathering. James, Lily, you need to get into position. Miss Warren, are you ready?" Was she ready? Ready to pledge her life to a man she had known for only 3 months? Ready to become a mother to children who weren't hers by birth? Ready to fully commit to this wild, beautiful, challenging frontier life that was nothing like what she had been raised for? Yes, she was ready. She had never been more ready for anything. "Let's go," Abigail said. They made their way downstairs and out the kitchen door, where Helen was waiting to walk with Abigail to the ceremony site. The children scampered ahead, Lily carefully guarding her basket of flowers, James walking with exaggerated dignity. As they rounded the corner of the house, Abigail got her first full view of the gathering. Every bench was filled with ranching families in their Sunday best, faces turned toward the flowered arch with anticipation and warmth. Children squirmed in their seats while their parents tried to keep them still. Old men stood at the back, too proud to sit, their weathered faces split in grins. Young couples held hands and exchanged knowing looks, remembering their own wedding days. And at the front, standing beneath the arch with Reverend Walsh beside him, was Quinn. He had been watching for her, and the moment she appeared, his whole face transformed. The nervousness, the formal solemnity he had been trying to maintain, all of it fell away, leaving only joy so pure and profound that Abigail felt it echo in her own chest. His eyes never left her as she walked down the makeshift aisle, Helen steady and supportive at her side. The fiddle music swelled, sweet and haunting. Lily scattered flower petals with careful concentration. James marched ahead of Abigail with the rings clutched in both hands, as if they were the crown jewels themselves. Abigail was peripherally aware of smiling faces, of whispered comments about how beautiful she looked, of Mrs. Hodgson dabbing at her eyes with her apron. But her focus was entirely on Quinn, on the man waiting for her under an arch of autumn flowers, ready to pledge his life to hers. When she reached him, Helen squeezed her hand once and stepped back. Quinn reached for Abigail's hands, his grip warm and strong and slightly trembling. They stood facing each other, and Abigail saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. This was happening. This was real. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat and smiled at the gathered crowd. "Friends, family, neighbors, we are gathered here on this beautiful autumn day to witness the joining of Quinn Mackenzie and Abigail Warren in holy matrimony. This is a joyous occasion, a celebration not just of romantic love, but of family, community, and the courage it takes to open your heart after loss and build something new." He spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred trust of marriage, about the particular blessings and challenges of joining a family already in progress. His words were simple but profound, clearly spoken from genuine care for Quinn and his children. Abigail listened, but mostly she was focused on Quinn's hands holding hers, on his eyes that never wavered from her face, on the children standing beside them as witnesses to this new beginning. "Quinn," Reverend Walsh said, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" "I do." Quinn's voice was strong and sure, carrying across the assembled crowd. "With my whole heart, I do." And Abigail, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part? Abigail thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the telegram that had shattered her old life, about standing alone and lost on a train platform. She thought about Quinn appearing with his frightened children, about his impossible offer, about the leap of faith she had taken. She thought about everything that had followed, the hard work and the laughter, the quiet moments and the grand revelations, the slow building of trust and love. "I do," she said clearly. "With everything I am, I do." James stepped forward with the rings, his face solemn with responsibility. Quinn took one ring and slipped it onto Abigail's finger beside his grandmother's sapphire, a simple gold band that felt like the most precious thing she had ever worn. "With this ring I thee wed," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "My life, my home, my heart, all of it is yours, Abigail, today and always." Abigail took the second ring, a matching gold band that they had chosen together in Cheyenne, and slid it onto Quinn's calloused finger. It looked right there, this symbol of promises made and kept. "With this ring I thee wed," she repeated. "I choose you, Quinn Mackenzie. I choose this life, this family, this love, today and every day after." "Then by the power vested in me," Reverend Walsh said, his face creased in a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Quinn, you may kiss your bride." Quinn's hands came up to frame Abigail's face with infinite tenderness. "Hello, Mrs. Mackenzie," he whispered. "Hello, husband," she whispered back. Their kiss was sweet and chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but it carried all the weight of the vows they had just exchanged. When they drew apart and turned to face their friends and neighbors, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Lily grabbed Abigail's hand on one side, while James took Quinn's on the other, and together, as a family, officially and completely, they walked back down the aisle. The celebration that followed was everything Abigail had never known she wanted. There was no formal receiving line, no stiff protocol. Instead, neighbors swarmed them with hugs and congratulations. Children ran wild with joy, and someone struck up a lively tune on the fiddle that had people dancing before the meal was even served. The tables laden with food became a feast that seemed to never end, with everyone pressing their favorite dishes on the newlyweds and insisting they must try just one more bite. Abigail found herself swept into conversation after conversation, welcomed with genuine warmth by women who shared stories about their own weddings, their own adjustments to frontier life, their own journeys west. These were women who understood hardship and resilience, who knew what it meant to build a life from nothing, who recognized in Abigail a kindred spirit even if she had come from such different circumstances. "You'll do just fine," one elderly woman told her, patting her hand with fingers bent by arthritis. "I can see it in your eyes. You've got the kind of strength that matters out here. Not just the ability to survive, but the courage to live fully. That man of yours chose well." Quinn was surrounded by men clapping him on the back, offering congratulations mixed with good-natured teasing about being caught in the snare of matrimony again. But through it all, his eyes kept finding Abigail across the crowd, checking on her, making sure she was happy. Every time their gazes met, he smiled, that full, unguarded smile that transformed his usually serious face. And Abigail felt her heart squeeze with love. As the afternoon stretched toward evening and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Abigail found herself sitting with a group of children who had demanded a story. Lily and James were pressed against her sides, proprietary and proud, while a dozen other youngsters crowded around her feet. She told them the tale of a brave princess who saved herself rather than waiting for a prince. And when she finished, one little girl with braids looked up at her with shining eyes. "Is that a true story?" the child asked. Abigail thought about her own journey, about saving herself in a way, about finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Yes," she said. "In the ways that matter most, it's absolutely true." As dusk began to fall and lanterns were lit, someone called for the bride and groom to dance. A space was cleared, the fiddle player joined by someone with a guitar, and suddenly Abigail found herself in Quinn's arms as they swayed to a sweet, simple waltz. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Mackenzie?" Quinn murmured against her ear. "Wonderfully," Abigail replied honestly, "though I think I've eaten enough food to last a week, and my cheeks hurt from smiling so much." Quinn chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Best day of my life." "Well, second best. The day I met you is tied for first. Even though you met me because your daughter nearly fell onto train tracks? Especially because of that. Providence has a strange sense of humor, but I'm not complaining about the results. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, and Abigail marveled at how natural this felt, how right. She had danced at balls in Boston, been partnered with eligible young men who knew all the proper steps. But none of those dances had felt like this, like coming home, like moving as one person, like the physical manifestation of the connection between their souls. I wish this day could last forever, she said softly. The day might end, Quinn replied, but forever is just beginning. After their dance, others joined in, couples young and old, children spinning until they were dizzy, even Mrs. Hodgson allowing one of the neighboring ranchers to sweep her around the makeshift dance floor. The music grew livelier, the laughter louder, the joy more effervescent. This was frontier celebration at its finest, unfussy, genuine, built on the simple pleasure of community and connection. As full dark fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, the party gradually began to wind down. Families with young children started gathering their things, thanking the bride and groom with warm embraces and invitations to visit. The food was packed up, with generous portions sent home with the newlyweds, despite Abigail's protests that they already had plenty. Gradually, the crowd thinned until only a few close friends remained, helping Mrs. Hodgson clean up the last of the celebration. James and Lily had long since succumbed to exhaustion, asleep on a blanket near the house despite their earlier protests that they weren't tired at all. Quinn scooped them both up with practiced ease, carrying them inside while Abigail followed, her heart full at the sight of her new family. They tucked the children into their beds, James barely stirring, Lily mumbling something about cake before settling back into sleep. Abigail smoothed the covers around them, dropped kisses on their foreheads, and felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. These were her children now. This was her life. In the hallway, Quinn caught her hand and drew her toward their room, the room that had been his alone but was now theirs together. Abigail's heart quickened with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. They had been proper in their courtship, never alone together for long, always mindful of appearances. Tonight would be different. Tonight they were husband and wife, with all that entailed. The room had been transformed. Someone, probably Mrs. Hodgson, had brought in fresh flowers, changed the linens to crisp white sheets, left a lamp burning low on the bedside table. It was simple but thoughtful, a blessing on this first night of their marriage. Quinn closed the door softly behind them and turned to Abigail. For a moment they just looked at each other, taking in the magnitude of the day, the enormity of the commitment they had made. "I have something for you," Abigail said, moving to the small trunk that had been brought to this room earlier. From it, she drew a carefully wrapped package. "I made it for you. It's not much, but Abigail, you didn't have to give me anything. You've already given me everything. Just open it," she said with a smile. Quinn unwrapped the package carefully and drew out a quilt. It was made from scraps of fabric, some from her own dresses, some from the children's clothes, some that had been Martha's that Mrs. Hodgson had quietly provided. Abigail had spent weeks working on it in the evenings after the children went to bed, her stitches careful and even, creating a pattern that was both beautiful and meaningful. "It's all of us," Abigail explained as Quinn examined it with wonder. "Past and present woven together. Martha's here too. See this fabric? It was from her favorite dress. I wanted to honor what came before while celebrating what is now. We're all part of this family's story." Quinn's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he ran his fingers over the careful stitching. "It's perfect," he said hoarsely. "You're perfect. God, Abigail, I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," she said firmly, "and I deserve you. We deserve this happiness, Quinn. After everything we've both been through, we've earned it." He set the quilt aside carefully and pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his face pressed against her hair. Abigail felt his heart beating against her chest, steady and strong, and knew her own heart was beating in the same rhythm. "I love you," Quinn said. "I love Martha, and I'll always carry her memory with me. But what I feel for you is its own thing, Abigail, just as powerful, just as real. You're not a replacement or a second choice. You're the answer to prayers I didn't even know to pray." Abigail pulled back enough to look up at him. "I love you too, and I need you to know something. I'm not afraid of Martha's memory. I don't feel threatened by what you had with her. How could I? That love gave you James and Lily. It shaped you into the man you are. I'm grateful for it, for her. How did I find you, Ed? Quinn wondered, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. How did I get this lucky twice in one lifetime? Maybe, Abigail said softly, we found each other. Maybe we were both looking for home and didn't know it until we met. Their kiss was different from the one they had shared at the ceremony, deeper, more urgent, full of promise and anticipation. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, Quinn reached into his own pocket and drew out the letter he had given Abigail that morning. You haven't read it yet, he observed. I was waiting for the right moment. Abigail took the worn paper and carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was neat despite Quinn's claims that he wasn't good with words, each line clearly written with care and intention. My dearest Abigail, I'm writing this on the night before we marry because I need to tell you things. I'm afraid I won't be able to say out loud tomorrow. I'm not a man of fancy words or pretty speeches, but I need you to know what you mean to me, what you've done for me and my children. When Martha died, I thought I died with her in every way that mattered. I kept breathing, kept working, kept caring for the children, but inside I was empty. The world lost all its color. I was just going through motions, counting down days until enough time had passed that I could stop pretending to be alive. Then you appeared on that platform, looking lost and scared and so damn brave, and something in that emptiness stirred. When you saved Lily, when I watched you throw yourself in harm's way without hesitation for a child you didn't even know, I saw strength and goodness and a kind of heroism that has nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with character. These past months watching you with my children have been the greatest gift of my life. You've given them back their laughter, their joy, their ability to trust and hope. You've been patient with their grief and generous with your love. You've never tried to replace Martha, but you've carved out your own place in their hearts, a place that's uniquely yours. And me? Abigail, you've given me back my life. Not the life I had before. That's gone and I've made my peace with it. But a new life, a different life, one I never imagined could be mine. You've given me mornings I look forward to, evenings I cherish, a future I can see and want to reach. I promise you this. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. I will work hard to provide for you and the children. I will listen when you speak, value your opinions, respect your dreams. I will stand beside you in hard times and celebrate with you in good ones. I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. I will never take you for granted. I will never forget that you chose this life, chose us, when you could have gone anywhere and done anything. That choice is a gift I will treasure every single day. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a widower with 2 children and a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Thank you for seeing past what I couldn't offer to what I could. Thank you for loving us. You are, without question, the best thing that ever happened to me. Forever yours, Quinn. By the time Abigail finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. She looked up at Quinn through blurred vision and saw that he was crying too, unashamed of the emotion on his face. You said you weren't good with words, she managed to say. I'm not. I just wrote the truth. Abigail carefully folded the letter and held it against her heart. I'm going to keep this forever. And when I'm old and gray, I'm going to read it and remember this moment, this feeling, this perfect beginning to our life together. You won't need the letter to remember, Quinn said. I'll be right there beside you, old and gray too, still loving you just as much as I do right now. They came together again, and this time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was their wedding night, the beginning of their physical union as well as their emotional one. Abigail had been nervous about this part, uncertain and inexperienced, but with Quinn's gentle hands and patient love, all her anxiety melted away. This was right. This was beautiful. This was the physical expression of everything they felt for each other. Later, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the quilt Abigail had made, listening to the night sounds of the ranch through the open window, Abigail felt complete in a way she never had before. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she didn't quite fit, like she was always trying to be someone she wasn't, like she was waiting for her real life to begin. Now she knew. This was her real life. This man beside her. These children down the hall, this ranch in the middle of Wyoming territory, this was where she belonged. Not because it was easy or comfortable or what she had been raised to expect, but because it was authentic. It was hers. It was home. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked sleepily, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy," Abigail said simply. "Truly, completely happy in a way I didn't know was possible." "Good. That's all I want, to make you happy." "You do. Every day, in 100 small ways, you do." They drifted toward sleep, safe and warm and loved, and outside the Wyoming night stretched on, vast and starlit and full of promise. The days that followed the wedding settled into a new rhythm. Abigail was no longer the governess, but the wife, the mother, the heart of the household. It was a subtle shift in some ways, but profound in others. She made decisions about the household alongside Quinn, planned for the future with him, shared the weight of responsibility as well as the joys. The children adapted quickly, as children do. They had already loved Abigail. Now they simply added Mama or Mama Abigail to their vocabulary and carried on with the resilience of youth. There were still hard days, moments when grief would hit unexpectedly. A song that Martha used to sing, a dress that had been hers, the anniversary of her death. But they weathered these storms together, honoring the sadness while also celebrating the new life they were building. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving as winters were in Wyoming. The ranch work grew harder, the days shorter, the cold relentless. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth, fires burning in the hearth, laughter echoing through rooms, love that grew stronger with each passing day. Abigail learned to cook more elaborate meals, to mend work clothes worn thin by labor, to stretch resources through the lean months. She taught the children through long winter afternoons, their lessons sometimes interrupted by snowball fights or impromptu sledding expeditions. And at night, when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Abigail and Quinn would sit together by the fire, talking about their days, making plans for spring, simply existing in each other's presence. These were the moments Abigail treasured most. The quiet intimacy of marriage, the comfort of being fully known and fully loved. Spring arrived with a rush of life and color. The prairie burst into bloom, wildflowers carpeting the grassland in purple and gold. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the children spent hours playing in the water, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Quinn worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the busy season ahead, and Abigail worked alongside him when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life, becoming part of the land as much as it became part of her. One afternoon in early May, Abigail was in the garden, Martha's garden, which had become hers too, planting vegetables for the summer harvest. She had dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her brow, and she had never felt more content. This physical labor, this direct connection to the earth and the food it would provide, satisfied something deep in her soul that Boston drawing rooms never had. "Mama Abigail!" Lily came running from the house, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa says to come quick. There's something important." Abigail's heart jumped with concern. "Is someone hurt? Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect. Just come." Mystified, Abigail wiped her hands on her apron and followed Lily into the house. She found Quinn in the kitchen with James, both of them grinning like conspirators. On the table sat a large package wrapped in brown paper. "What's all this?" Abigail asked. "It came today," Quinn said. "From Boston. I think it's from your mother." Abigail's hands trembled slightly as she untied the string and unwrapped the package. Inside was a carefully packed box containing letters, photographs, and several items wrapped in tissue paper. The first letter was from her mother, and Abigail's eyes filled with tears as she read the loving words, the pride in what Abigail had built for herself, the joy that she had found happiness. The package also contained the photograph album from Abigail's childhood, pictures of her father who had died years ago, small mementos of her Boston life. But the most precious item was wrapped separately, her grandmother's china tea set, carefully packed and miraculously intact after its long journey west. "Mama wrote that every home needs something beautiful," Abigail said, her voice thick with emotion. "Something that reminds us where we came from while celebrating where we are." Quinn came to stand behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked at the delicate china together. "We'll use it on special occasions," he said, "and we'll tell the children about their Eastern grandmother and their history that stretches beyond this ranch." "Past and present woven together," Abigail murmured, thinking of the quilt she had made. "Just like it should be." That evening, they used the china tea set for the first time, serving tea and Mrs. Hodgson's best cookies, while Abigail told stories about Boston, about her childhood, about the different world she had come from. The children listened with rapt attention, James asking dozens of questions, Lily declaring that she wanted to visit Boston someday to see where Mama Abigail had lived. "Maybe we will," Quinn said, glancing at Abigail. "Maybe when the children are older, we'll take a trip back east. Let them see that world, understand that part of your story." "I'd like that," Abigail said, "but I'd also be glad to come home here, because this is home now, completely and truly." As summer ripened and the ranch thrived, Abigail found herself thinking often about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Wyoming. That desperate, rejected bride standing on a train platform seemed like a different person, someone from a story she had read rather than lived. She had been so lost then, so convinced her life was over, so unable to see beyond her immediate pain to any possibility of future joy. If she could go back and speak to that woman, what would she say? That the rejection that had felt so devastating was actually the greatest gift. That being stranded with nowhere to go would lead her to exactly where she needed to be. That the impossible choice she made to trust a stranger would result in a love deeper and more real than anything she had imagined. But perhaps that earlier version of herself wouldn't have believed it. Perhaps she needed to live through it, to experience every moment of uncertainty and fear and gradual hope, to become the woman she was now. One evening in late summer, as the sun set in shades of amber and rose, Abigail stood on the porch watching Quinn and the children play in the meadow. James was teaching Lily how to skip stones in the creek, and Quinn was laughing at something one of them had said, his face free from the haunted sadness that had marked it when she first met him. They were a family, not perfect, not without scars, but whole and healing and happy. Mrs. Hodgson came to stand beside her, following her gaze. "You've done well, dear," the older woman said quietly. "Better than I dared hope when Quinn first brought you home. You've made this house a home again." "They did as much for me," Abigail replied. "Maybe more. I was as lost as they were, Mrs. Hodgson. We saved each other." "That's how the best loves work," Mrs. Hodgson said wisely. "Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to walk together through the hard parts and the good." As if sensing her gaze, Quinn looked up from the creek and caught Abigail's eye. Even from this distance, she could see the love in his expression, the contentment. He raised his hand in a wave, and she waved back, her heart so full it almost hurt. "Mama Abigail," Lily called, "come play with us." And Abigail went, leaving the porch and crossing the meadow to her family, the Wyoming sky endless and blue above her, the prairie grass golden in the fading light. She went with joy and gratitude, with love that had been earned through patience and trust and the courage to believe in second chances. She went home. Not to the house, though that was part of it, but home to the people